There's a nice hidden lake a short walk away from my house in Parsonfield, Maine. I've been going fishing there for as long as I've lived here. It's hidden away from any roads or houses. It has perfect privacy, and I would always be the only one out on the lake fishing. In fact, I would leave my kayak in the same spot by the lake whenever I wasn't using it. It was easier than lugging the thing back and forth from my house to the lake anytime I wanted to use it. I would leave it leaning up against this huge tree every time. The kayak is heavy enough to not fall over from a windstorm or anything. I also leave it covered to prevent critters from taking refuge inside. It was a warm summer's evening. I was out on the lake already for about an hour, and I'd caught a few trout already, which I'd thrown into the cooler. It was dusk at this point. The little bit of light left in the sky was disappearing behind the trees. I was gonna bring it in soon, and just then, I heard sounds from the edge of the lake. I turned and saw someone standing at the edge of the water, tipping a barrel of some kind over, pouring its contents into the lake. It looked to me like they were polluting the lake with something. I took it upon myself to yell out, "Excuse me, what are you doing?" The person looked up at me, and he then ran into the woods, with the contents of the barrel still pouring into the water. I looked more closely at the liquid being poured out into the lake, and it looked like a dark red liquid. Though it was dark out, so I can't say with 100% certainty if it was red, but it was very dark. I felt a sense of unease creep up throughout my body. I decided I wanted to leave. I'm a big nature guy though, and seeing people littering or polluting the environment makes me sick. I genuinely couldn't resist shouting something out to that person, but I didn't feel comfortable here any longer. I planned on reporting this to the Department of Environmental Protection. I paddled the kayak back to my usual spot. I took all of my gear off the kayak before pulling it out of the water. As I was putting the cover over the kayak, I heard one single snap of something not far away, like the crunch of something under a person's shoe. I turned and was about to say who's there, but I decided against it. I finished covering the kayak quicker than I ever had before. I didn't even bother standing it up to lean on the tree this time. I left it on the ground. I picked up my gear and cooler and started quickly walking out of the woods and onto the road, which led to my house. It was only a couple minutes of a walk and I was back home. I kept looking over my shoulder the entire time though, thinking someone was behind me. I put my gear in the shed real quick, then went inside. I never locked the door so quickly. I was genuinely spooked. I rinsed off the trout and put them in the fridge, planning on cooking them tomorrow. Tonight, I just heated up some leftovers. As the food was in the microwave, there was a knock at my front door. The fear and dread that I was feeling the entire walk back to the house returned in an instant, and my suspicion that I was being followed home was basically confirmed. I mean, who else would be knocking on my door this late? My lights were on, my car was in the driveway, whoever it was knew I was in here. I had all the shades closed though, so nobody could look inside. They knocked on the door again. The microwave beeped as the timer hit 0. I'm sure whoever was outside heard it. All the windows were cracked open, and a moment later, there was a knock now on the window, and a man's voice said through the window, "Excuse me, I think you saw me at the lake earlier. I'd just like to explain myself." There was absolutely no chance I was opening the door to this person. For them to stalk me to my house told me this was a dangerous person. They repeatedly knocked on the window and kept yelling hello through it. I decided to acknowledge him now that he was getting more aggressive. I yelled, "Yo, leave or I'll call the police." I intended to either way, but it was still a threat to get him to leave. The man responded calmly now, saying, "Sir, if you could just open the front door, I'll explain everything to you." I repeated my threat, and I didn't hear his voice again. At this point, I shut and locked every window in the house and turned on the AC. I also made a report to the non-emergency police number, detailing both the barrel being dumped into the lake and the man coming to my house. I also made an online report with the Department of Environmental Protection. Making these 2 reports honestly made me feel a little better about going to sleep that night. But thank God I'm a light sleeper. In the middle of the night, like 2 a.m., I heard a crash from downstairs. I immediately sprang out of my bed and grabbed my Glock from the closet. I heard someone's attempt at quiet footsteps coming up the creaky wooden steps. I had my Glock loaded in hand as I stood behind my dresser right by my closet, aiming at the door. I heard very slow creeping towards my door. My bedroom door is closest to the stairs, so it was naturally the first door that they would approach. And sure enough, I heard the doorknob slowly press down, and then the door pushed open. I saw nothing but the man's silhouette enter the room. I flicked on the lamp next to me so he could see my gun, and I screamed, "Get on the ground now." He raised his hands in the air, and seemed for a second to be motioning for me to calm down. He had a small blade in his hand. I told him to drop it, but then he said calmly, "I'm leaving," and he turned and ran for downstairs. I yelled at him to stop, but he clearly took the chance on me being too afraid to pull the trigger. I heard him leave through the front door. I ran downstairs to lock the front door right away and then call 911. My living room window was shattered. Glass was all over the floor. I kept my sight on that broken window until the police officers showed up. I had to explain that I already made a non-emergency report of what happened earlier. In fear of waiting too long by morning for the barrel to be gone, in the darkness, I went with 2 of the officers who showed up to my house to where I saw that man dumping the barrel into the lake. But after 20 minutes of walking around looking for it, it was gone. The man must have made sure not to leave it behind. I gave my best description of the man to the police for their report. The man was a short, bearded white man with a receding hairline and glasses, wearing a black flannel shirt and black pants. After the police left, I stayed in the living room all night with my gun next to me, watching TV. No way in hell was I going to sleep with a broken window and some nut job out there. At dawn, my brothers came over to help me fix the window. My brother Dale stayed at the house while my other brother and I went to Home Depot to get the window and parts. Dale stayed at the house with me for a few nights till things cooled down. My not-so-wild theory is that the barrel contained human remains, possibly dissolved in some kind of acid. Why else would that man follow me home and then break into my house to potentially murder me? Trust your gut if something feels wrong. I knew if I opened my door to that man, something terrible might have happened to me. Ever since I was a little kid, all the older men in my family would take me fishing every opportunity they got. It was like some family ritual. I, being the youngest, meant that I was next in line to become an expert, like all of them claimed to be. The ones who took it the most seriously were my dad and his brother Matthew. Our houses were decked out like the ones you've probably seen on fishing shows. I won't go into detail, but if you took a step into my house, you'd instantly be able to tell my parents spend more time on the water than on the land. This is actually his story, not mine. My dad's a pretty hard guy to scare, but let me tell you, whenever he tells this story, it's like he's a different person. He doesn't like talking about it, but every so often, at a family gathering or a special occasion, one of my relatives will ask him to tell it, and he will. My dad's name is John. He was fishing with my uncle Matthew and their close friends Rich, Jeff, and Monty. They had set out early, before the sun had even broken the horizon, heading to a remote spot they had all agreed was prime fishing territory. This place was a couple of hours boat ride from the nearest marina, tucked away in a secluded cove-type area that few bothered to explore. It was known among them for its abundant bass and the occasional pike. The day started like any other fishing trip, with the boat cutting smoothly through the mist rising off the water, everyone sharing stories and jokes over the hum of the engine. They anchored the boat in a familiar cove, surrounded by dense forest. Monty was the first to crack open a beer, even though it was so early in the morning. My dad tells me all the time that Monty is his wild friend, the one who tends to drink a little more than he should. They fished for hours, the only sounds being the occasional splash of a lure hitting the water, and their own laughter. Oh, and the occasional crunch of empty beer cans that they were drinking like water. As the day wore on, they had their fair share of catches, each one sparking a small celebration. As dusk approached, the light began to wane. A dense fog rolled in from the water. My dad describes it as the boat literally being swallowed by fog. Rich, who was the most experienced fisherman of the group, kept saying that he had never seen fog so thick. That's how unnatural it was. Jeff, the jester of the group, was almost as drunk as Monty, both of whom were seemingly unfazed by the fog that had ensnared them. It was starting to get dark. They had originally thought that they could just wait out the fog, but it didn't seem to be going anywhere. My dad and Rich agreed that Matthew should just try to drive the boat out of the cove and into the open ocean, where the fog probably wouldn't be as dense. Matthew agreed, but even though he was typically the most cautious, he only narrowly avoided colliding with the shore. He refused to risk further damage to his prized boat. They reluctantly came to terms with the fact that they'd probably have to spend the night on the boat. My dad made the point that they'd need to tell their families about the situation, and of course, they had drifted into an area of the cove that had no signal. My dad needed to handle some business at work, so neglecting the problem was not an option. He offered to go ashore in search of a signal, and Rich and Jeff said they'd join him. Matthew would stay back to guard the boat and an increasingly inebriated Monty. My dad, Jeff, and Rich made their way over to the shore and jumped out of the boat, only getting slightly wet. My dad made a point of snagging the emergency flares in the boat, just in case they got lost and needed to signal Matthew to come find them. The three of them made their way into the pitch-black woods, lit only by the shine of their phone flashlights. My dad and his friends have all done their fair share of camping, so it wasn't like a forest scared them too much. They began trekking uphill, hoping that higher ground would give them a better chance of finding a signal. My dad always made a point of emphasizing how dark, yet eerily foggy the forest was. You could practically feel yourself slicing through the fog. Just as they were adjusting to the dense atmosphere, a series of strange clicking noises began to permeate the silence, first emerging from directly in front of them before encircling them completely. These sounds were unlike any forest sounds they were familiar with. It was rhythmic yet erratic, as if someone was tapping out a code meant only for the woods themselves. The distinctiveness of the noise made one thing clear: it was human-made. The realization that they weren't alone hit them like a freight train. Rich, the most seasoned of the trio when it came to outdoor survival, whispered urgently for them to turn off their flashlights. "Don't give away our position," he hissed, with a note of genuine concern in his voice. As the lights switched off, the darkness became thicker than the fog. The clicking noises stopped abruptly, replaced by a silence that seemed to weigh on their chests. Time lost meaning as they stood there, frozen, unsure of their next move. I'm sure they were all thinking the same thing. The idea that they might have stumbled upon some kind of clandestine gathering or a woods cult was terrifying. Then, as suddenly as it had stopped, the silence was broken by rustling noises, this time much closer. Then silence again, and then a guttural scream echoed through the trees. A sound so primal and full of anguish that it rooted them to the spot. Before they could process what was happening, rapid stomping noises thundered through the woods towards them. The three men took off back the way they had came. Acting on fear and pure instinct, my dad fired the flare gun behind them. The flare cut through the fog, lighting the woods up. For a moment, the woods were as clear as day, and the sight that met their eyes was nothing short of horrifying. Illuminated by the flare's red glow was a pack of more than 10 individuals dressed in what could only be described as tribal attire. Some of them brandished wooden spears, but the light from the flare only lasted a split second. Jeff screamed and almost stumbled, but Rich quickly grabbed his arm to keep him upright. My dad describes this part as the most overwhelming feeling of pure terror he has ever experienced. The forest seemed to fight against them as they fled, ducking under branches and jumping over roots. By some miracle, they emerged from the tree line, panting and disoriented but alive. They screamed at Matthew to start the engine, the urgency in their voices leaving no room for question. Matthew complied immediately, and the boat lurched forward just as their pursuers reached the shoreline. In the chaos, my dad fired the last flare into the air, back towards the shore. For a split second, as the flare's light pierced the fog, they saw their pursuers at the water's edge. It was freakish. There must have been at least 15 of them, just standing motionless at the water's edge. The flare's light faded, and it was dark again. Matthew managed to get a safe distance away, and stopped the boat again. After the engine was off, the only sounds were Jeff, my dad, and Rich's breathing. My dad says he wasn't able to process what had happened for nearly an hour. He was functioning off pure adrenaline and survival instincts. They ended up taking turns keeping watch while the others slept, and left first thing in the morning as soon as the fog dissipated. Funnily enough, Monty had passed out before everything went down and doesn't remember any of the details of that night. I still get shivers down my spine when I tell this story. I can only imagine what my dad must feel when he thinks back to it. I've been fishing for as long as I can remember. I'm almost 60 years old now, and even though I've been fishing thousands of times, I can't think of any other way I'd rather spend the rest of my life. My kids are all off living their own lives, and things around the house are quiet now. You could hear a pin drop most of the time. Sometimes I miss the old days, being able to throw the pigskin around with my boys in the backyard, but some things just aren't in the game plan anymore. I usually fish with my pals from college, but more often than not, I found myself going at it alone, like a lone wolf. This was one of those times. I haven't stepped foot outside upstate New York in over 15 years. I don't see a reason to. We've got some of the best fishing lakes in the country, and I plan on making full use of them. It was mid-April in the early season, just after the ice out and before May hit. For whatever reason, I decided I wanted a more secluded spot this time around, so I chose a nondescript lake in the middle of nowhere that was pretty small. I drove up an hour before sunrise so that I could be out on the water when the sun poked through. I unstrapped my kayak from the roof of the car and made my way over to the lake. I rode out to the middle of the lake and admired the beautiful early colors starting to paint the sky. It felt like home. You can bet your bottom dollar I'd never trade a day like this for anything. It was a little chilly, but I've got skin like steel. I could tell the sun was just about to appear in the sky, so I started gearing up. I was shooting for largemouth bass, so I made my way back to the outside edge of the weed beds, planning to move back toward the middle of the lake if I got skunked. I went for a 6.5-foot medium-action spinning rod with 9-pound monofilament line. I was using a wacky rig, which is a 4-inch rubber stick worm, my go-to for catching largemouth. Just before I was about to start what would hopefully be a swell day on the water, I noticed something strange across the lake. I couldn't quite see what was going on, but I could tell that there was movement. At first I thought it was a fellow fisherman, but curiosity got the better of me. I reached into my knapsack and pulled out my pair of binoculars I used for bird watching. I looked across the lake, and there were 3 figures wearing dark colors and hoods covering their faces. They looked like they were digging a hole or something on the edge of the lake. I kept watching. They finished their hole, and while I was expecting them to put something inside it, they actually did the opposite. One of them pulled something out of the hole, which I couldn't make out even with my binoculars. Then the other 2 did the same, pulling out a few more things that I couldn't quite see. I was beyond confused. Then I watched as they started tossing the items into the lake, each one making a distinct splash as it smacked the water. Something was wrong. Out of nowhere, a wave of fear washed over me. I didn't know who these people were, but I started thinking they might be dangerous. I didn't know what to do. Thankfully, they started to leave without noticing me. I thought about turning a blind eye, but couldn't bring myself to do it. I waited until they disappeared into the woods, and slowly rode my way over. I was shaking at this point. I got to the spot where I was pretty sure they had tossed everything. I started fishing, only this time I wasn't fishing for fish. I was going for something else entirely. I fished around for about an hour with no luck. I had to try something different. I racked my brain trying to figure out what I could do. And just then, I remembered my depth checker. I had it tucked away in my Volvo. I was determined at this point. I rode back to shore, returned to my car, retrieved the depth checker, and rode back to the spot. I was sweating heavily at this point. I poked around for a bit, feeling nothing but squishy lake bottom. And then, I felt something hard, something metal. I made a mental note of the spot and grabbed my rod. I took the rig off and replaced it with the largest hook I had. I let the spool out slowly, my pointer finger feeling the gentle movement of the line. 50 years of fishing experience was going into this one catch. I felt the slight resistance in the line. It had hit something. I moved the line around slowly, hoping I'd be able to snag it on whatever was down there. After about a minute, the line tugged a little harder than was normal. I was snagged. I reeled in slowly, careful not to drop my catch. What I pulled out of the water had me shivering in my boots. I stared at the black 9mm on the end of my line. Those thugs had thrown a gun into the lake. I didn't feel safe anymore. I didn't even bother looking around for the other items. I reeled the gun into my kayak, careful not to touch it, and hightailed it out of there. As soon as I got to dry land, I called the police. They launched a full investigation and recovered several more unsettling things from the lake. I insisted on watching them conduct their search because I needed to know what was at the bottom of that lake. They found a keychain with like 7 keys on it and a bunch of old, foreign coins from different countries wrapped in a cloth. The most eerie thing they found, though, was a locket. It was waterlogged, so the pictures inside were faded and unintelligible. The police told me they'd contact me if they ever connected these dots to some kind of crime. They never called me, though. But the story didn't end there. One night, I don't remember how many days after this incident, I heard someone in my front yard say, "That was the car, I know it," and then people snooping around my yard. They never rang the bell or knocked on the door, but I heard multiple people circling my house, and then they just left. I have no idea if it were the same people, and if they were, I have no idea if I'm being watched anytime I leave my house. I alerted the police once more, hoping this would reopen this investigation, but nothing became of it once again. I still have so many questions. Why would those items be buried in the first place? And why would those people go back just to dig them up and hide them again? Maybe they realized that there was a greater chance they'd be found in the ground, so they went back and threw them in the lake. Or maybe those items had been in that hole for years, and they decided to dig them up for some reason. All in all, this was the strangest thing that has ever happened to me while fishing. Throughout my life, I would go through phases of different hobbies. I'd pick something that interests me, obsess over it for a year or so, and then find something new to keep myself entertained. During the summer of 2022, I was big into fishing. About an hour's drive away is a shore house my family has owned for decades that's on the water with a lagoon and small Boston whaler. My friends and I would take frequent trips there to fish and just chill. It was the following October after summer when my two friends Kevin and Arian decided to hit the shore house for a weekend to try to catch some striper, as they're abundant during the fall months. Kevin was an avid fisherman, which was a big reason why I got into the whole fishing craze in the first place. Unfortunately, during this time, our boat was out of the water due to maintenance, so we'd have to fish off the beach and piers. This was no problem though, as Kevin had all the necessary rods and gear to do so. We got together on a Friday afternoon, and I drove us all down. When we got there, we fished during the day off of different piers along the inlet. Night rolled by, and only one of us had caught fish, which was Kevin, of course. It was just a small bass though, nothing too exciting. Bummed about our luck, we decided to stay up late to fish off the beach during the night. Kevin said he knew a good beach spot about 15 minutes away, which took us down a desolate road with woods on both sides. It opened up into a small gravel parking area, or at least what seemed like one. Kevin said since we'd have to walk a little ways to the spot, we should take everything we need now so we won't have to go back to the car to get anything. We planned on staying up to catch the sunrise, so we packed accordingly. We walked about 5 minutes down this path, which opened up into a massive beach. We set up camp, which consisted of beach chairs, a speaker, and 2 coolers, one filled with ice for fish and one filled with snacks, water, and beers. Kevin brought these massive fishing rods that were ideal for beach fishing, and also rod holders that you would hammer into the sand. He also had these little bells that connect to the tip of the rod to notify you of any movement. We all casted our rods, cracked a couple beers, and played the waiting game. Within 2 hours, each of us had caught decent-sized fish, which definitely lightened our spirits. We were having a great time, music blasting, knowing that no one was around on this deserted beach. Mid-conversation, Arian stopped talking, lowered the music, and jolted his head to the left. He asked if we heard that, to which we replied, "Heard what?" It looked like he was concentrating on something for a second, and then said, "I heard someone yell something." We obviously thought he was hearing things or just joking with us, but he insisted he heard someone yell out something that sounded like a yo or a hey. Either way, it seemed unlikely, given that we were on some hidden beach at like 1 a.m., so he quickly forgot about it, and our conversation resumed. It definitely made us more aware, though. A couple minutes later, right after I cast in a fresh hook, I noticed something out of the corner of my eye. There was something on the beach in the distance, but I couldn't see what exactly. The others noticed it too. As it got closer, we realized what it was. A person walking towards us. We grew silent and turned off the music. He came up to us. It was a middle-aged white man, maybe 40 or 50. He was wearing a dark blue jacket with a hat and hood up. The way he walked up to us was really sketchy, and he had this intimidating look on his face. We said, "What's up?" kind of awkwardly. He just eyed us down for like 10 seconds and then said in a low voice, "What are you boys up to?" It was pretty apparent what we were up to. Kevin said, "We're fishing," and he let out some grunt of acknowledgement and nodded his head. He didn't say a word after that and just stood there looking at us, and then the rods, and then the water. We shot each other looks, thinking he was going to try and rob us. There's no way he could have taken on the three of us, though. The bell on one of our rods broke the silence, notifying us that we had potentially hooked a fish. I said we got one, kind of directed at everyone, but mostly that weird guy in hopes that I would get some response out of him like a normal person. I walked over to the rods and reeled in a small striper. When I went back to unhook the fish, that man had turned around and left. We watched as his dark silhouette faded away into the night. We made sure that we had all of our belongings, then sat and just talked about how odd that encounter was. He left without harming us though, so we concluded that he was just some weird man who is now thankfully out of our business. We kept the music off just to be cautious and cracked a few more beers as our conversation transitioned to different topics. At one point, while staring into the horizon, I thought I heard something in the distance. It took me a second to realize what it was, but when I did, my heart dropped. It was a car alarm. I knew it was mine. It was the only car in that lot, and no houses were out there for probably miles. We started panicking and decided to run back to the car, leaving all of our stuff behind. It took us a couple minutes to get there, and when we did, I was completely distraught. My tires had been slashed, and my driver's side window had been shattered. I got on my phone with the police immediately and told them my location and situation. The operator asked if I knew who may have done it, and we said some sketchy guy came up to us as we were fishing. She asked if I knew where he went, and I said no. Just as I said this, we heard rustling in the woods around us. My heart rose into my throat. I felt trapped. We frantically ran like 200 yards down the road and hid in the trees. I told the operator this, and she said to stay hidden and keep quiet. Within 10 minutes, we saw 2 cop cars speed past with their lights on. We ran back to the car and saw 3 officers searching the area. Multiple things had been stolen, including my wallet, some cash that was in the glove box, and the remainder of Kevin's fishing gear. They found a large knife lying on the ground nearby, which they took for fingerprints and evidence. I told them the whole story with my adrenaline still pumping. They said we were smart to run away and hide, as it's very likely this man meant us harm. Those words made me appreciate my life so much more. The officers made us feel safe, and were nice enough to help us pack up the equipment and carry it back. They took down our information and gave us a ride back to the house. We stayed up all night reflecting on what had just happened. That morning, Arian got us a ride up north, and I picked up my car from the shop a few days later. To this day, this is by far the most frightening experience I've ever had. What was supposed to be a normal fishing trip became a terrifying ordeal that cost me hundreds of dollars worth of damages. I never got a call back from the police, meaning that guy is probably still out there. Needless to say, I gave up fishing as a hobby and haven't touched it since. It was January of 2016. My buddies and I live right next to a nature preserve and used to love to explore it. It was a weekend and we were looking for something to do, and being mischievous, we decided to go explore the storm drain that supplied water to the creek in the nature preserve. It had a barred barricade blocking entry into it, so we decided we'd throw some rocks in to see if the rocks made contact at any point so we could figure out the depth. However, we received something much more in return. After throwing a rock against the wall in the storm drain, a couple seconds passed, and we heard a terrifying thump or bang in return.
What the hell?
Dusk was approaching, so we called it a day and watched back over the video we recorded of it. The next weekend, I gathered a few more buddies, and we decided we would unbolt the barricade to the drain and go inside. I got the barricade to fall down, and we made our entrance. It went in about 20 feet until it hit a dead end. However, there was a second branch of the drain to our left that we'd have to take a step up to get into. We proceeded in one by one, all 5 of us. At first, it was nothing but spider webs and mud. We traveled about 500 to 1,000 feet into the drain as it kept getting skinnier, and we had to duck to proceed. We were all frozen in our tracks as we heard the same exact thump we heard the weekend before. A scary and hard to describe sound. We had no signal and were beyond terrified at that point because we were all right next to each other and the noise had come from much further away. At this point, my friend decided to start recording in case anything else happened. We made it out of the drain safely, without anything else happening. The scariest and most chilling part of this whole story was when I reviewed the video and saw a slight outline of a head at one of the turns of the drain. This couldn't possibly have been one of us because we had all been together. I took a screenshot of it and zoomed in as far as I could, and well, I was horrified. There in the frame was a demon-shaped looking head with glowing eyes and what appeared to be pointy ears. To this day, we have never gone back into that nature preserve, let alone the storm drain. It all started when a group of friends and I decided to start exploring abandoned warehouses due to the stories and myths surrounding them in our hometown, Laredo, Texas. The story surrounding the area of warehouses was that the buildings were haunted due to immigrant workers being worked and mistreated to death. The local news covered the death of many of the workers. Many of the deaths were also ignored by the authorities due to the illegal status of the workers. In the warehouse that we visited, the company was in charge of the maintenance of the railroad tracks as well as the disposing of hazardous material. In the video I recorded, the barrels filled with chemical wastes are seen spilled open. The warehouses are located in a part of town where there's nothing really around except for train tracks. The predominantly Hispanic culture of my city gave rise to the stories about railroad workers that had lost their lives in the area. We decided to explore the warehouse during the day and then during the night. On our daytime exploration, we found remains of what seemed to be remnants of satanic rituals because we found a chicken's foot and pentagrams drawn in permanent marker. We figured that was the work of local groups trying to communicate with the damned souls of the workers. We also spotted a makeshift couch or bed where the workers would sleep. The night we visited, we had the feeling we were being watched. We were actually also being followed and attacked by crows inside the building.
Oh, no, man. ¿Qué son?
While we were exploring that night, on several occasions, we spotted shadows and heard noises throughout the area. As we delved deeper, we got the feeling that someone or something didn't want us in the warehouse. A creepy laugh can be heard in the video footage I captured, and that was our cue to get the hell out.
Nada, I don't think there's no power.
Oh my god. Did you hear that?
Yeah. Let's just get out of here.
Things only got weirder though, as the satanic drawings and the chicken foot were gone the next time we passed that spot, yet they were spotted only earlier that day. I'm completely convinced that someone or something was stalking us in that warehouse that night. I believe the lost souls of the workers, or a satanic group of people that frequented the place, were there that night with us, watching. As we walked out of the warehouse, we noticed that the crows were very on edge and tried to attack us, like I mentioned earlier. The events that happened that night still sometimes keep me up at night. I'm a freshman at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. Some friends of mine came home from a hockey party after their game and asked me to come hang at their dorm. They brought some girls to the party that they knew from high school and happened to be in the city. They came back to the dorm to hang as well. One of the girls that came in was super friendly but very drunk. I didn't see her drink anything in the dorms. I left with my girlfriend at about 2 a.m. At around 3, I heard sirens and could see lights outside of my window. I figured it was just another kid that came home with alcohol poisoning. Then I heard the most gut-wrenching scream of my life. I walked out of my room and saw my friends from the dorm I had just left running down the hall wanting my help. I started running down the hall following them and saw blood on the floor and thought for sure someone had been stabbed. Then I saw 3 police officers and a paramedic team strapping the friendly girl down to a stretcher while she was screaming and thrashing. I went to ask my friends what happened and they looked exhausted. They said her eyes rolled back into her head. She started growling and bleeding heavily from both nostrils. She attacked some of our friends, yanking their hair and biting them like an animal. This girl fought off 3 6-foot-tall, fairly muscular guys by herself. Keep in mind, this girl is probably 5'1", 110 pounds, and was possessing superhuman strength, all while screaming at the top of her lungs. The scariest part is when the RA came over to pray over the situation, as he's a devoted Christian, and she started screaming, "F God, F Jesus, the devil is coming for you all." At this point, my heart was sinking in pure fear of the situation, as was everyone else who was present. The emergency responders said they had never seen anything like this, even if she was possibly drugged at the party. I was able to capture a roughly 20-second video of her screaming in the dorms. You can't really see her as the paramedics are in the way, but if you listen closely towards the end of the video, you can hear her scream, "They're coming for you all, they're coming for you next." Last I heard, she woke up with no memory of the situation, but is in a very dark place at the moment. This is the video that was captured. In my small town, there's not much to do, so my friends and I make the best of it. And in the winter, we sometimes throw snowballs at cars. This was after we got done ice fishing one day. We went to my house and decided it would be fun to throw snowballs at cars for a while. Usually no one would get too angry as they were just snowballs, but one person got really mad at us. My friend Drake decided to throw a snowball at one more car and he told me to record. He hit right under the back passenger side. It sounded like a hard hit. We stayed there for a second, laughing, until he slowed down and eventually threw it in reverse.
Yeah. Sit there. He's right there.
We ran and hid behind a car in a different parking lot, and he pulled in about 5 feet from us, but he didn't see us. So we ran home, and that's when I stopped recording. When we got home, we took off our jackets and sat down to watch the video I just took, but we were interrupted by this sound. I froze in my seat. Then again. I didn't think this guy would find us, but still I turned off the lights. My dogs went crazy. Drake and I are 14, we don't get scared that easily, but this was freaking us out. We hid in my bathroom in my room and turned off the light. We actually laughed, thinking he would leave in a couple minutes. Our friends thought we were joking, so we took videos of him still pounding on the door. Our friends thought it was funny and karma, but we didn't find it amusing anymore. We thought we were in danger because he wouldn't leave. So I called my mom, who was at the Walmart about 10 minutes away. She sounded more like she was angry at us for throwing snowballs at cars than concerned that someone was banging on the door. She said she would call one of the neighbors to come scare him off, then she hung up. It felt like an eternity before he stopped banging on the front door, but only a couple minutes passed, and then the banging sounds came from a different door. Then it hit me that I didn't lock that door, and he could easily come in. Then I got a disturbing call from my mom, telling me one of the neighbors said she could see a deranged-looking man, possibly drugged out, looking through my room's window and the front door window. We sat there for as long as we could and decided to make a plan to get the .410 shotgun in my mom's room, load it, and then make a break for it. But when we entered my mom's room to look for the gun, we saw his face at the window. His hairy, withered-looking face, and we screamed and ran. Drake had the idea to blast a police siren sound on my speaker in my room, so we ran to set the speaker up. While doing so, we heard the back door open, the one which was left unlocked. Drake managed to get the siren sound effect to play on my speaker, and that apparently worked, as we heard him leave through the same door he entered. Moments later, one of the neighbors, Paul, rang the doorbell. I let him inside and he stayed with us and waited for the cops and my mom to get there. We explained everything. The cops and my mom all said we shouldn't have been throwing snowballs at cars like that, obviously, and that we got lucky that they showed up when they did. My advice is to never mess with people like we did. You never know who you're dealing with. I'm a cemetery operations coordinator, or you can just call me a cemetery manager. Part of my job is sitting down with guests and family members of the deceased to set up funerals, facilitate the sales of plots, etc. A 30-something-year-old man named Antonio, very spiritual man, once sat down with me to purchase a plot for his sick father who was in hospice care. Antonio was a Hispanic man with a very thick accent, and I saw in his eyes he was a very caring man. He showed me pictures of his father, who also looked like a very sweet man, much too young to be taken away from his family. But unfortunately, the man's time came that same week, and Antonio arranged for his father's funeral service at the cemetery. It was a very stormy day, the day of the funeral, which is thought to be a sign of good luck. The funeral procession stopped in front of the front office building briefly. I stepped outside under the front awning of the building and saw Antonio in the car behind the hearse. We waved at each other. Due to the weather, I went back inside until the procession was ready to proceed to the burial site. I got in one of the cemetery pickup trucks and followed the procession to the final stop, where I would stand with my umbrella supervising, as part of my job is making sure funeral services go smoothly. After the funeral, I did some laps around the place in the truck just to survey the area, as I did at least a couple times a day. I had a lot of paperwork to take care of, and on top of this, I had to close the cemetery that night, so a little later I went back to my desk and took care of this. The cemetery closes at 5:30, so as soon as it started to get dark, I drove around the place one more time to ensure all visitors had left, then drove over to the front gate to shut it. It was a relatively warm early March. The days were still on the shorter side, so by closing time on a normal day, it would already be getting darker. But on this stormy-ass day, it already felt like it was nighttime. I was driving back to my office when I thought I saw someone hurriedly walking down one of the lanes of tombstones before turning behind a hedge and disappearing out of sight. I beeped my horn so as to let them know the place was closed, but strangely enough, I didn't see them again. I grabbed my umbrella and ran out into the rain in that direction. I turned beyond the hedge he turned at and looked down this long row of tombstones on one side and hedges on the other. I didn't see anyone. I looked around in the rain for a solid 20 minutes, but eventually I had to give up. I drove back up to the office and browsed through the CCTV footage. None of it picked up on any unusual movement, even though it was a bit harder to see much because of the storm and it was also pitch black outside now. I tried to multitask, keeping an eye on the camera while finishing up some of my paperwork, when I heard the front door to the visitation room slam shut. I sprang up from my chair and yelled, "Hello?" My first thought was that it was the same person I saw before. Maybe they got locked in the cemetery and were looking for assistance in leaving. I stepped out into the lobby, but no one was there. I looked around and again said, "Hello?" Maybe the door slamming shut was them leaving. I started looking out all the windows, and I stopped when at one of them, I saw someone on the other side, looking back at me, with a blank expression. I jumped back and screamed, and they didn't flinch. I stepped closer and made a squinty-eyed, confused look when I realized I recognized this Hispanic, older-looking man. In my head, it reminded me exactly of the pictures of Antonio's father he showed me. With my heart in my throat, I ran out the front door of the building and to the side where I saw the man, but he was gone. He wasn't booking it into the fields, he wasn't hiding in a bush nearby, he was gone. I looked around me as I stood in the rain getting soaked, then ran back inside, packed up my things, locked up, and got in my car. I opened and closed the gate, once more locking it behind me, and drove home. When my wife asked me at home why I was being so quiet, I just told her, long day at work. To this day, I think I was just overworking myself, and my mind was playing tricks on me, but it still is genuinely disturbing to think about. My name is Jeremy. This was in the dead of October, chilly and windy. I live in a somewhat big town. It's very poor and old, early 18th century type buildings. A friend and I were bored one night and decided to go fuck around at 3 a.m. I know that going out at 3 a.m. in a poor town isn't exactly smart, but we like to have our fun. We got bored of driving around blasting our music. We're both very big metalheads, and at that point we had our own band. So we decided it would be interesting and cool to walk around a cemetery in the town. Behind the old town square, there's a massive cemetery. It's divided by two sides of a highway, both sides taking up about 20 acres of land. As I said, it's massive. We decided to check out the older part of the cemetery. This part is completely separated from the rest of the newer cemetery with an old iron fence and gate. We get to walking around and checking out the cemetery, trying to read the old moss-covered graves, taking pictures, being a little bit disrespectful, I know. But these were graves from at least a century ago, so there was no one living that would be upset by it, and I'm sure the people in the graves didn't mind too much. After about an hour of checking it out, we sit down next to a giant pecan tree in the middle of the old cemetery. That's when we hear this little girl laughing. It was really close to us. At first I assumed maybe it was a toy left on a child's grave or something like that. I'm not one to scare easily, so I just figured it's motion activated or something like that. We are not at all easy to scare, so we both sort of laugh, pointing out that it's creepy and just keep talking and enjoying the ambiance. Then, as in all stories like this, I get the feeling of something or someone watching me. Once again, I just figured that I was letting the entire thing get into my head. Then my friend says he thinks he sees someone in the shadows of a small wooded area right next to the cemetery, of which we were really close. At this point, we're both a little creeped out and decide to get up and leave. And that noise, the exact same noise, played again, and we hear leaves crunching underneath the feet of someone. That's when we booked it. We ran down the hill leading to the old part of the cemetery, down where my car was parked. I've never ran that fast in my life. It sounded like that laughing noise was following us at that point. We both sort of just went into full fight or flight mode at that point, going as fast as we could without thinking. The noises behind us stopped as we got to my car. I started my car and put it in drive, pulling out into the highway without looking. Luckily no one hit us. We get down the road to the only gas station that's open at this time of night to check in the back of my car. We had both been discussing how we were scared some shit had been done to it. We get around to check and immediately find the back door is open. I know for a fact neither of us ever opened it. There was no reason for us to open it. I look in the back seats, make sure nothing's there, get right back in the car and peel out. I'm still confused about what happened that night. I'm not sure if we both overreacted or what. All I know is that I still feel that weird feeling that something is behind you whenever I tell this story. When I was 19, my friend Sean, who was a big goofball, came over to chill in our basement as he often would during the summer. I remember he had a Coke bottle in his hand and I was eating Wendy's when he said we should check out that creepy little cemetery across town. It was the most random idea ever, and I even told him that. Still, we had no school the next day, and I knew exactly which cemetery he was talking about. I don't know if one should even call it a regular cemetery. It's just a small plot of land with maybe 100 tombstones at most. The tombstone's very archaic looking, and any time we'd pass, there would be no signs of anyone having come to visit within the last decade. The site probably dated back centuries, and it had this super creepy vibe to it because it was closed off by a gothic metal fence, and it was surrounded by woods on two sides, the road on one, and some old abandoned building on the other. Everything about it just gave scary vibes. It took a little persuading, but Sean managed to get me to want to check it out too. Ironically, it was a very cloudy, wettish kind of day, I guess conveniently adding to the mood. Sean pulled up his Honda to the side of the road. I told him to pull up more so it wasn't obvious. This was a low traffic road, so it would look kind of suspicious. He pulled up a few hundred feet down the road, and we got out and cut through the woods so that any potential passing traffic wouldn't see us entering the little cemetery. Hopping the fence in the woods was easy. It was maybe a 3 or 4 foot fence. Sean kind of took the lead on this since it was mainly his venture. He led us through the eerie little plot of land, and we looked at the archaic tombstones. They all seemed to be from the 19th century. The writing on some of them was illegible at that point. I know it sounds super dumb and cliche, but I couldn't help but feel like I was being watched constantly. I started looking around the surrounding woods. I told Sean how creepy this was. "I know," he replied. Still, with the feeling of being watched, I looked at the abandoned building next to the cemetery, at one of the windows. For a brief moment, I knew I saw someone standing at the window, even through the fog, smudge, and dirt on the glass, but they casually either ducked or walked away from the window. I told Sean we were being watched by someone in that building, and he turned to look at it as well. Then he went to look for the entrance to it. I told him don't. I said we should just leave before we get in trouble. I stayed still by the tombstone he was looking at while he walked around the building, and then he found a way in. He called me over, but I stayed put. Then I heard some loud kind of crack, so I looked in that direction, and there was this older man, probably around 55. Gray hair, had on a black raincoat, I believe he was wearing jeans, and he had a mustache, but that's all I really got of him. Then he opened his mouth and screamed, not just yelled, he screamed, "Get out." He screamed it so loud I thought I saw birds fly away from being startled. And just like that, I started to feel lightheaded, and suddenly everything went dark. The next thing I remember was waking up to being dragged in the woods. I freaked out, thinking I was being kidnapped, but when I turned and got up, I saw it was just Sean. Sean was freaking out about something. He told me to follow him and run back to the car, so I didn't ask questions. As we ran through the woods, I heard something close behind me, and when I turned, I realized we were being followed by someone, so I ran even faster. We got to his Honda, and he basically put it in drive before the car even had a chance to fully start. When Sean was inside that abandoned building, he found a sigil of Baphomet painted on the wood floor, which is basically the sign of Satan. Around it were a bunch of freaky dolls with buttons for eyes. He didn't get to see anything else in the building, because he heard the old man scream at me outside. He came running to find me passed out on the floor, and he saw the old man slowly walking over to me. He started to drag me away from the old man and into the woods. He actually literally picked me up and threw me over the fence to get me out. I quickly came back to consciousness, and that's when we ran. I had only fainted one time in my life, and it was at that moment. I don't know why I fainted, but it happening at a graveyard with some kind of satanic ritual building right next to it makes it that much stranger. My grandpa passed away a few years ago. I was always very close with him. This past July, on his birthday, I paid him a visit at the cemetery. The cemetery he and my grandma chose to be buried at was about an hour drive from my apartment. My family lived closer, so they all went to his grave together. I had to go separately. It was a rainy, depressing day, and there's nothing worse than visiting a cemetery on a gloomy day. The gatekeeper of the gate asked for the plot number. I gave it to him and he let me in. It's a pretty big cemetery, and I'd only been there a couple other times. Not as the driver though, so I had a hard time finding it. I didn't see many other people, if any, at the cemetery that day. I'm sure the weather had something to do with it. Eventually I found his stone and parked my car in the grass to the side. I put some flowers down under his stone, stood there for a while with my eyes closed, and prayed. When I finished my prayer, I opened my eyes and looked up. There was an old man standing about 5 rows of graves down, but directly across from me, and he was looking right at me. I knew this man though. It was my grandfather. But no, it couldn't be. I rubbed my eyes and he was gone. Did I just have a spiritual moment? Or were my eyes and mind playing tricks on me? Either way, I got the chills and I had goosebumps. I was quite honestly freaked out. I got back in my car, said, "Love you, Grandpa," and drove off. I felt like I had a headache on my way home. Not sure why. I was the only car on Prospect Road, a quiet road with dense forest on either side. Commonly, there would be deer crossing here. As my car zipped down the road, I spotted someone on the side of the road coming up, which was odd. There were no sidewalks or a walking path on this road. I slowed down, and it couldn't be. It looked like my grandpa again. When I realized this, my heart dropped 1,000 feet, and I swerved the car accidentally. I desperately tried to regain control and come to a stop. Luckily, my car didn't end up in a tree, rather just skidded out in the middle of the road until coming to a halt. I immediately looked back to where I saw him, and I saw a deer on the side of the road, looking at my car. My heart was literally racing. I was terrified. I was not well, and I needed to get home. I made sure no cars were coming, and got back in my lane. I focused on the road as best I could given what I had just seen twice. I felt weird the rest of the day. Not sick, but something wasn't right with my head. I went to bed early after watching an episode of my show. I woke up at like 2 in the morning to my phone ringing. It was an unknown number. My heart started racing again. Any call at this hour couldn't be good news. I accepted the call and put the phone up to my ear. There was static on the other end. Finally, I said, "Hello?" More static. But what I thought I heard next, I couldn't believe. Just briefly, for maybe half a second, I thought I heard my grandpa's voice over the static. I tried to say hello again, but I was too shook. Every part of my body was actually shaking. Then the call cut to silence and ended. I called my phone provider the next day to trace the number. They couldn't. They didn't have enough data to trace it apparently, though I don't know if that was just bullshit or not. The events that took place that day and night were the scariest I've ever experienced. Do I think my dead grandpa was trying to contact me? I don't know, because that sounds ridiculous. You'd think if you experienced something like this, you'd be so full of emotion and joy. But no, it still terrifies me, and I really still don't know what to think or how to feel about it. Whether it sounds ridiculous or not, this happened, and I wonder almost every other night, was that really my grandpa on the phone? My friends and I were very stupid when we were teenagers. I was like 17 or 18 when this happened. It was the month of October, and I wanted to do something scary in the spirit of Halloween. There's a small cemetery about 10 minutes from where I live, and when I was drunk with a couple friends, I said we should sneak into it. I'll make up some names for my friends, Ryan and Mike. We were at Ryan's house. He didn't drink ever. So when I came up with the idea, he was the one to drive us to the cemetery. Mike and I were really the ones leading this. Ryan was just along for the ride. But then again, he hadn't been drinking. Ryan parked in some parking lot across the street. It was a ghost town because it was past midnight at that point. We made sure no one was around to see us as we hopped the fence into the cemetery. It wasn't exactly pitch black out, but it was slightly hard to see more than 10 feet in front of us. So we were all using our iPhone flashlights. There didn't appear to be any night security in the cemetery, so we kind of dispersed from each other. Ryan seemed to be following Mike more closely. I could still see where they were because of their flashlights. I went off a little further on my own, and I decided I'd start taking a creepy video. So I started recording with the lights still on, of course. I recorded a bunch of old headstones and the general eerie vibe of the cemetery at night. I didn't see Mike and Ryan anymore, so I started to go look for them, still recording. I looked at my phone screen and froze. There was a woman, dressed in a white gown or dress I want to say, with long, gray-looking hair. She was looking down at the ground. I looked up from my phone screen to look at her in person, but she was gone. I started to back away. I looked back at my phone screen, and there she was again. Only now she was looking into the camera, or rather looking at me. I looked up from the phone again and could not see her once more, so I looked back down at the screen again, and there I could see her moving closer to me. I started to scream for Mike and Ryan as I sprinted away from that spot. I couldn't see their lights anywhere, and they weren't answering my screams. I had a feeling they were going to try to scare me, so I ran back for the fence of the cemetery to hop it and get out. I made it to Ryan's car and texted the two of them saying they need to get out of the cemetery now. They met me at the car minutes later. We all sat in the car and I showed them the video I took. They had the same horrified looks on their faces I did. Now that I was actually watching the whole video, I could see the moment the woman slowly lifted her head from looking at the ground to looking at me, and then she starts to move towards me. We could only see her moving for like a second or two before I start screaming in the video and running away. But the way she was moving, we could see no leg movement. It almost seemed as though she were floating to me. I have that video saved on my old iPhone 4S, but the stupid thing won't turn on. It gets stuck at the Apple logo. I don't want to reset that phone until I can get that video off of it somehow. My friends firmly believe the woman in the video was a real, living person who also happened to be in the cemetery that night. But me, having been the one to actually find her, and only being able to see her on my phone screen, well, let's just say I was never a believer in the paranormal until that night.
You've got mail.
Number 5. Sandy McNulty, age 27, had just recently gone through a divorce. Within the same month, she signed up for Match.com and a few days later received a strange email. The email addressed Sandy by her full name with a long paragraph explaining that the sender knew of her recent breakup and thought that they would make a great couple. The sender asked for Sammy to get back to him about what she thought. The email was signed anonymously, but there was also a file attached to it. It was a large picture of a man's genitalia. She assumed it was her ex at first, but the picture did not resemble him, and when confronted, he was sincere in telling her that it wasn't him. Plus, she told that he wasn't the type to do anything like this. Sandy continued to receive emails from the anonymous sender, with each one getting more angry and aggressive. She did the best she could of ignoring it, until attached to one of the emails was a picture of the side of her house taken at night. She blocked the sender's email finally, and that was the last she ever heard from any of this. It's still unknown whether it was the ex sending the emails or not. Number 4. A former Reddit user at one point posted a story of a scary email he received. He had one day received a text message from an unknown number telling him to check his email as soon as possible. He obliged and found a message in all capitals titled, "Download this now." It was a short message addressed to the user with his full name, address, phone number, and all. There were 5 files attached, 4 of them pictures, and one an exe file titled, "Download this now." Each one of the pictures were very personal to the user. The first one a picture of his house, the second a picture of a very young woman who he eventually recognized to be his mom, the third a picture of him as a baby, and the fourth a random picture of a creepy looking middle-aged man. The user didn't open the exe file. He instead reported the email to the police. It's unknown what the exe file was. The Reddit post was taken down within the same month. Number 3. Father David of a small New York town church had an email address dedicated to his church. He received a strange email with no title, and upon opening it, his computer crashed and he got a blue screen. He would have trouble restarting it until finally successfully logging on to have all his files and data gone, and his screen wallpaper was a large and shockingly disturbing and realistic image of Satan. Internet Explorer, along with other important programs, would not open, and occasionally, a distorted laughing sound effect would play in the background. It's unknown how this was accomplished, but it was most likely just a very cruel prank by a hacker with a little too much time on his hands. Number 2. In the year 2009, a huge wave of emails filled with viruses was spreading across the internet. The email titles were innocent enough. For example, some of them were titled, "Free 40% off coupon to Target." However, once opened, a virus would be forcibly installed into the user's computer without their knowledge. These viruses were known to allow all activity on the user's computer to be monitored, sometimes even giving partial or full control over the computers, and sometimes even enabling the built-in webcams to the computers, secretly spying on the users as they used their computers without them ever even knowing. Nobody could seem to figure out how this was accomplished or how to prevent it, but luckily, the swarm of emails eventually died down on its own. Similar swarms of emails have since occurred on a few occasions, but not as dangerous. Number 1. The girl in this story is very sensitive about this and refuses to give her real name, so for the purpose of this story, she'll be referred to as Jen. Jen was attending freshman year in high school. She was a very pretty girl and got the attention of a lot of guys, both young and, unfortunately, much older as well. She received an email from the dean explaining that her grades could be improved and he would like to talk to her about it at some point. Strangely, he left a note at the bottom of the email informing Jen not to respond to the email. A week passed and Jen received another email from the dean. This time, he asked her to meet him at the back of the school at 7 a.m. before classes started. Jen walked to school and went around back this one day and could see somebody poking their head out from behind one of the dumpsters, not the dean. She ran all the way home and the parents reported this to the school. It turned out the dean of the school didn't send the messages at all. The email was traced back to a website that allows you to send fake anonymous emails, and the computer used to send it was the computer in the furthest corner of the local library.
I was 21 when this happened. It was 2017, and at the time I was working part-time at a gas station a few towns over from where I lived. It was one of those jobs I only planned to keep for a few months, just until I figured out what I wanted to do next. The shifts were usually easy, a lot of ringing up snacks and cigarettes and stuff like that, more so than the occasional person paying for gas and cash. During the day, it was annoying but normal. The nights were different. The nights dragged. The place felt too bright inside and too dark outside, and every customer felt a little stranger. That night, I was working the closing shift by myself, and I still think about it all the time. The store closed at midnight. Around 9 or 10 at night, the phone started ringing. I answered without thinking anything of it. The second I picked up, I heard this weird voice. It was low and drawn out, like someone trying to sound like a killer in a horror movie. It reminded me right away of Ghostface from Scream. It sounded really forced, like someone trying to do an impression, but yet it was still unsettling. The voice asked if I was all alone in the store. I just stayed quiet for a second, then said something sarcastic like, "Yeah, you got me," and then I hung up. I figured it was one of my friends messing with me. I texted the group chat and asked which one of them was calling the store pretending to be a serial killer. They all found it funny and acted confused at first. One of them asked what I was talking about, then another said he was at home. I assumed they were just lying because that would have been the obvious response if they wanted to keep the prank going. About 10 minutes later, the phone rang again. It was that same fake horror movie voice. This time they asked why I hung up. I once again sarcastically said, "Alright, you got me." The voice let out this soft laugh that sounded weirdly real, not playful like I expected. Then it said I shouldn't be rude to people who know where I am. I hung up again, but this time I felt a little off. It was probably still a joke, but there was something about how calm the person sounded that got me. I kept trying to shake it off. Customers were still coming in at that point, enough to keep me distracted. People getting gas, buying beer, and getting lottery tickets. But every time it slowed down, I found myself looking at the phone. It rang a third time around 10:40. I answered, and I immediately regretted it. The voice asked if the store always got this quiet that late. That got under my skin more than I want to admit. I said nothing and hung up. After that, I texted my friends again, this time more seriously. I said it was getting old and asked who was doing it. Again, they all denied it. I started messaging them one by one. It was the same thing. One was with his girlfriend, one sent me a picture from his basement, one was apparently at a friend's house almost half an hour away. At that point, I started getting annoyed instead of scared. I thought maybe they had someone else doing it, but the truth was, even though the caller never said my name, he was saying things that matched what was happening in the store, like how quiet it was. Around 11, the calls started coming closer together. I stopped answering after the fifth one. The phone would ring and I would stare at it and let it stop on its own. Then a minute or two later, it would ring again. That went on for maybe 15 minutes. I started checking the cameras more. There were a few around the outside of the building and a few inside. The store sat by itself off a road that got pretty dead at night. There was a small patch of woods behind one side of the building and an alley-like area where the dumpster was. The outside cameras weren't great. They had blind spots, and the picture at night was grainy. Still, I kept flipping through them, half expecting to catch one of my idiot friends crouched outside laughing. I didn't see anyone, though. Then I started hearing little sounds outside, which at first I told myself was nothing. For example, a tap somewhere. Then what sounded like a light scrape near the side wall. Then a noise by the back that sounded like someone stepping on loose gravel. It got to a point where I couldn't dismiss it any longer. I texted the group chat again and told them to seriously stop. I even sent a picture of the empty store and wrote that this wasn't funny anymore. They kept denying it. One of my friends actually called me from his normal number and I told him what was happening. He sounded genuinely confused and said he wasn't joking, nor was he involved in any joke. He told me to lock the door early if I had to. I didn't want to do that unless I really felt I needed to. Part of me still thought I was making too much of it. At around 11:40, one last customer came in. I remember the exact sound of the door opening because it made me jump. I looked up and saw just a regular-looking guy at first, maybe late 20s or 30s. Nothing outwardly crazy about him. He wasn't dirty or dressed weird. He just had this blank expression. He didn't say hello, he just walked in and started moving through the aisles. I watched him on the cameras while pretending not to. He took way too long for someone who ended up buying one bag of chips. He kept drifting to different aisles and then stopping. More than once, I saw the top half of his face appear above the shelves while he looked toward the counter. Not in a casual way either. It felt like he was checking on me. I kept thinking maybe he was high, or maybe he was tired, or maybe he was deciding what he wanted. But my stomach had that heavy feeling by then, like my body already knew something was wrong before my brain wanted to admit it. He was in there for at least 8 or 9 minutes. Then he finally came up to the counter with a bag of chips. He still didn't say a word, so I didn't either. I just took the chips and scanned them. When I looked down at the register, everything felt normal for 1 second. Then I looked up and caught him staring directly into my eyes. He held it for maybe 2 seconds. It doesn't sound long, but it was. There was no expression on his face when he did it. Then he looked down and paid. I handed him back the bag, and he turned and walked toward the door. I remember thinking maybe I was overreacting. Maybe he was just a weird guy. But right as he got to the door and pushed it halfway open, he stopped and turned his head back toward me without fully turning his body. His chin was slightly lowered, so his eyes had to look up at me. Then he smiled. I still don't know how to explain that smile without sounding dramatic. It looked like he knew exactly how creepy he looked, and he was doing it on purpose. It made every hair on my body stand up. Then he stepped outside, and instead of walking toward any of the pumps or toward a car, he walked around the side of the building. When he did it, he kept his eyes on me through the glass. He kept that smile, too. I just stood there watching him until the angle cut him off. Then I rushed to the camera monitor and followed him there. I saw him round the building and head toward the side where the woods were. Then he disappeared into the blind spot behind the building. He didn't come back out. I waited maybe 10 seconds, then 20, then a minute. He never reappeared. That was enough for me to lock the door early, even though it was a little before midnight. This part might sound dramatic, but I texted my family and my friends and told them that there was a creepy guy outside and I wasn't joking anymore. I said if I stopped replying, that meant something probably happened to me because of him. I rushed through the closing stuff as fast as I could. I barely cleaned anything. I kept checking the cameras over and over, expecting to see him pop back out. Nothing. Midnight hit, and I decided I couldn't stay there any longer. I grabbed my stuff, turned off what I needed to turn off, and went to the front door. I unlocked it and stepped out, and that moment of having to relock it was so tense I couldn't have done it quick enough. Once I did, I took off running to my car. It was parked off to the side of the building. I got most of the way there, and just as I reached it and slowed for half a second, I heard fast footsteps. Not running, but worse somehow, like speed-walking steps slapping the pavement in front of the store. I turned and saw him. It was that guy. He had come from the front corner of the building and was moving toward me and my car fast. I yanked my car door open and threw myself inside. I locked the door and started the engine so fast I almost flooded it. The second the car started, I hit reverse and peeled out of that lot. I looked once in the mirror and saw him standing there in the lights watching me leave. The whole drive home, I was sending voice texts and regular texts to everyone saying I was right, that I knew he was going to come out of nowhere. None of that was a prank anymore. The next day, I texted my boss and told him exactly what happened. I said I wasn't doing overnights anymore. He looked at the footage later, and his response honestly made me even angrier. He got kind of defensive and said the guy looked like a regular customer to him. He said maybe I had just gotten spooked because of the phone calls and connected things that weren't connected. That pissed me off more than I can explain. I was the one there. I was the one getting the calls. I was the one who saw that guy disappear around the building and come speed walking at me out of nowhere when I left. I didn't care if the footage didn't fully capture how it felt because I knew what happened. I quit right after that. I didn't even argue much. I just told him if he thought that was normal, he could work the closing shift himself. I ended that job with attitude, and I was proud of it. Even now, many years later, I still think the caller and that guy who came in were the same person, even if I can't prove it. My name is Cadence. I work the closing shift at a small dive bar in the quieter part of my town. The place is right off the highway, but the parking lot also has a back entrance that's available to the general town. It's nothing fancy, just a dimly lit spot where the regulars know each other by name, and the jukebox has been playing the same rotation of classic rock for years. Most of our customers are locals, truckers passing through, and the occasional lost tourist looking for a stiff drink. I like it though. The routine is predictable, the tips are surprisingly decent, and I've learned how to handle the usual bar crowd. The talkers, the flirters, the quiet drinkers, and the ones who just want to be left alone. Weekends are obviously a lot more hectic, but the thing about working during the week is that I'm expected to work my night shifts alone. I don't even get a bar back to pop in now and again. Yeah, it's obviously easier work and slower during the week, but I miss the company of my coworkers. I tend to be pretty vigilant during my shifts because we do get the occasional bar fight considering the kinds of crowds we attract. That's why I clocked the guy immediately. It was sometime after 1 in the morning on a Tuesday when he walked in. If I had to guess, I'd say he was in his late 40s, but he was extremely clean cut and well groomed. Not the kind of look you'd expect from a guy his age in an area like this. He was wearing a black turtleneck underneath a black trench coat. Definitely well dressed, but casual about it. I'm not sure how to explain it, but he had this aura of sophistication about him that makes you think of money. Real money, not the loud look at me kind. He glanced around slowly before walking swiftly over to the bar and taking a seat. I also remember him having oddly good posture, but that's neither here nor there. When I walked over, he glanced at the bottles behind me and ordered something top shelf without hesitation. As I was pouring his drink, he asked me if I liked working here with a smile on his face. It was a normal enough question, so I answered him honestly. I told him yeah and smiled back. I then made a joke about being a bartender or something. I wish I could say I got a creepy vibe from him, but that's not the energy he was giving off. He genuinely seemed like a stand-up guy, kind of like the single dad at his kid's baseball game that gives the whole team a high five. He chatted with me for a bit, which I didn't mind since the bar was pretty quiet at that point. Eventually, he asked me if I ever thought about doing something bigger, which I admit was somewhat bizarre. Again though, not a totally creepy question given the nature of the situation. I gave him my standard bartender smile and told him I was happy for now. He nodded and sipped his drink, seemingly disappointed at my answer for reasons I didn't understand. After a long pause, he asked me what time I got off out of nowhere. That question surprised me. I hadn't picked up any kind of flirting from him whatsoever, so I was a little disappointed to discover that our conversation had just been another one of those empty attempts at getting my number. I smiled and gave him a vague answer, trying to brush him off in a friendly way without seeming uptight. Before he could answer, I busied myself and began wiping down the counter, but he didn't press. He just smiled like he already knew, then drained his drink and pulled out a crisp $100 bill, laying it gently on the bar like it was nothing. Then, without another word, he walked out into the night. I didn't really know what to make of the encounter. I know it sounds like nothing, but his demeanor was just so far off my radar that I was intrigued. Either way, I figured I was never going to see him again and got on with my life. As it would turn out though, I was wrong. About a week later, he came back. Only this time, he wasn't alone. There was a woman with him. She drew my attention since I hadn't seen her before. She looked like she was in her mid-30s and was dressed in a way that didn't quite match her age. Trendy, but off, like someone trying a little too hard to blend in with a younger crowd. I watched her closely as the two of them approached the bar. Everything about her seemed calculated, from the way she smiled too easily to the way she leaned against the bar like we were already friends. As I was setting down napkins in front of them, the very first thing she said to me wasn't a hello or a drink order, but a compliment. She put on this overly joyful smile and said, "You're so pretty." Her fingers brushed against my arm as she said it, lingering just a second longer than normal. I laughed and thanked her, but I could instantly tell that something was off about this woman. The man didn't speak, which I thought was also a little strange given that he had been so talkative last time. They ordered drinks and poured them, and that's when questions came flooding in. The woman asked me how long I'd been working here, along with how old I was and a bunch of other small talk questions like that. I answered in short, polite sentences, but I got the sense that this wasn't small talk. She was studying me. At one point, she looked over at the man, and it seemed like they were communicating despite not speaking. She looked back at me and told me that she ran an exclusive event club. She leaned in a bit as she said it, lowering her voice as if to prevent her being overheard by another patron. She told me that she's always looking for young, fun people for private parties, and that I'd make a killing, 10 grand for a weekend. I let out a small, forced laugh and told her it sounded too good to be true. She insisted that it was real and told me that a bunch of girls like me worked for them. Her smile never faltered at any moment, which was starting to creep me out. She steered the conversation back to the job, circling around the same words. Fun, safe, exclusive. Then, casually, she said, "You should step outside for a second. There's someone who can explain it better." My pulse kicked up. I wasn't playing around at that point. I didn't even bother pretending like I wasn't creeped out. "I'm good," I said in a firm voice. No smile on my face this time. Just then, a group of customers walked in, laughing and talking loudly. The woman's expression changed in an instant, her friendly mask slipping just slightly before she turned to the man beside her. Without another word, they left. I'd be lying if I said I wasn't unsettled after that. Those random people had just propositioned me for God knows what. I told my coworkers and my boss about the situation, and we all agreed to keep an eye out should those people return. My boss assured me that he was always a 15-minute drive away should I need him, and the bar's security cameras were typically enough to deter any misbehavior. There wasn't really much I could do beyond that. It's not like those people had done anything illegal. I tried to push it out of my head, but a few nights later, after closing, I saw the car. It was parked across the street, engine off, just sitting there. I tried to tell myself it was nothing, but the feeling of being watched crawled over my skin like static. As I walked to my car, I kept my head down, my keys clutched tight in my hand. When I pulled out of the lot, I checked my mirrors. The car followed. It stayed back just enough to avoid suspicion, but every turn I made, it was still there. I took a random turn onto a side street, and it followed. Another, still there. I started freaking out internally. I knew it was them. I forced myself to stay calm, to think. Then, without hesitating, I navigated and pulled into the parking lot of a police station, gripping the wheel so tightly my knuckles practically turned white. The second I pulled in, the car sped off. Nothing happened after that for a while, but I knew it wasn't over. It turned out I was right. It was a slow weekday shift, barely anyone coming in. By midnight, I was wiping down the counter, half thinking about closing early, when the door creaked open. It was the woman. I immediately sent my boss a text as inconspicuously as I possibly could. I looked back up, and the woman was staring at me with that same artificial smile. She walked slowly to the bar and sat down with her hands folded neatly. I was debating just telling her to leave when she said, "Thought I'd come check on you." My stomach started twisting, but I did my best to hide it. I told her we were about to close and that she had to leave, but she made this pouty face and asked for just one old-fashioned. I thought about denying her, but I figured pouring the drink would stall her long enough for my boss to arrive. So I turned around and got started, trying to keep my cool. And then I heard it. The soft, unmistakable click of the front door shutting. I whipped around. The woman was gone. I felt this awful pit in my stomach as I stepped toward the entrance. Through the glass, I saw it. A black van idling just outside. Without thinking, I locked the door as quickly as I could. But then, metal rattling from the back door. Someone was trying to get in. I didn't think. I grabbed the heaviest thing I could, a metal shaker, and clutched it like a weapon as I dialed 911 with my other hand. There was no way the police would get there in time, so I thought about making a run for it out the front door, but I didn't for whatever reason. I was bracing myself for a fight when I saw headlights pulling into the lot. It was my boss. The sounds on the back door suddenly stopped, and a few seconds later, the van pulled out of the lot with a screech. I embraced my boss and told him what had happened, and he said he had gotten the license plate of the van as it was leaving. When the cops arrived, my boss reviewed the security footage with them. It was worse than I had imagined. Just before the woman left, the cameras had captured two masked figures crouching near the front door, waiting. There was another person in the back who was banging on the door with his fist, clearly trying to flush me out to the front. It was downright horrifying. To make matters worse, the plate number my boss had caught turned out to be unregistered. It's been quite a while since this incident, but no progress has been made. The only good news to come out of the whole thing is that my boss doesn't make me work alone anymore. Despite that, I'm still extremely uneasy anytime I'm scheduled for a night shift. I still question how they knew I'd be working alone. It doesn't make any sense. Even now, I often think about what would have happened had I given in to fear and run out the front door. I used to work the night shift at a gas station / convenience store off a quiet stretch of highway. I say used to because after what happened to me a few months ago, I won't work a night shift again. It's a small station, the kind that barely gets any business once it gets late. Most of my shift was spent restocking shelves, wiping down counters, and occasionally ringing up a trucker or traveler passing through. I remember the whole thing vividly. It was just past 2:30 in the morning. By then, even the truckers had mostly dried up, and I was left with basically nothing to do. I scrolled mindlessly on my phone, trying to kill some time. At one point, I stepped outside for some air, rubbing my hands together against the cold. I exhaled a few times, watching my breath disappear in the cold. The parking lot was empty, just the pumps, the road, and the dark stretch of trees beyond. The neon sign flickered faintly, and I remember it being hazy out, like you could literally see the moisture in the air. Even with the highway not too far off, it was pretty silent out there. Right as I was about to walk back towards the store, I noticed something move out of the corner of my eye. I whipped my head around and realized there was a person standing behind one of the pumps. How had I not noticed him earlier? He was wearing a dark red hoodie with a hood up, and he had both hands shoved in his pockets. There wasn't a car in sight, so he obviously wasn't fueling up. The only thing was, he didn't seem to be heading towards the store either. He was just standing there, half turned toward the store like he was watching me. At first, I figured maybe he was waiting for someone, but something about the way he moved rubbed me the wrong way. He was kind of shuffling about in this circular pattern. I entered the store, but made sure to keep an eye on him through the glass. I kept track of him while pretending not to, hoping someone would drive up and pick him up or something. But after a few minutes, he started walking toward the door. Slow at first, then suddenly pushing inside like he'd made up his mind all at once. He walked up to the counter, but didn't say anything right away, just stared at me like he was sizing me up. Then, in a rushed, almost rehearsed way, he muttered that his car had broken down just before the pumps. He said he needed a jump or maybe just a little gas to get to the next town. I was literally shocked. He wasn't even trying to make his story believable. Like, I couldn't believe he actually expected me to buy his BS story. I offered to call a tow truck instead. No, he said, too quick, shaking his head. He just needed a flashlight, maybe some help checking under the hood. Something was definitely off, that much was true. The way he spoke, the way he watched my reaction, it felt like a test. To be fair though, people walking into gas stations at that hour are usually a little strange, and I started wondering whether he actually needed help and was just an odd person or on something. I asked him where his car was parked, and he told me it was just beyond the highway entrance. I was obviously skeptical, but then he pointed at the monitor behind me. I turned to look at the screen, and to my surprise, there actually was a car parked out there. I thought to myself, oh crap, maybe this guy really does need help. And that's when it hit me. I had literally just been outside, and I would have remembered a car parked out there. I glanced back at the monitor, and saw the slightest movement near the car's back bumper. Someone was crouching just out of view. A cold wave of dread hit me. I forced a casual smile and agreed to help the guy, but not before telling him I needed to grab my phone from the back office. I turned slowly, not wanting to spook him, but the second I was out of his direct sight, I slammed my hand onto the emergency panic button under the counter. The alarm went off instantly, screeching through the store. I expected him to attack me, but what he did instead was even more unsettling. His nervous energy disappeared. No more fake urgency, no more shifting from foot to foot. He actually relaxed. His whole body language shifted, and then he smiled. Not a panic smile, not an embarrassed one either. A slow, knowing grin, like he had all the time in the world, like this was amusing to him. I was in shock. I didn't even have time to get physical with him. In one fluid motion, he turned and bolted. I ran to the monitors just in time to see both of them take off. Not toward the car, but into the woods behind the station. The car just sat there, engine off, headlights off. No one inside. By the time the police arrived, it was exactly as I saw it. The car was still there, but the men were gone. No footprints leading away, no sign of them anywhere. And then one of the officers pointed something out. Something I hadn't noticed before. The front passenger door was open. There had been a third person inside the whole time. The police took my statement down, I turned over the surveillance footage, and that was that. A few days later, they followed up with me. They had the car towed and ran the plates. Turned out, it had been reported stolen nearly a week earlier, over 100 miles away. No one had come forward to claim it, no reports of missing persons, no other crimes linked to it, just an abandoned vehicle in the middle of nowhere with no explanation. That was months ago and still nothing. I don't know why convenience stores are such popular targets, but I can say for sure that I will never work another night shift again. This happened a couple weeks ago. I work the night shift at Walmart. It's not the worst job in the world, but after a while, it starts to feel like you're just floating through time. The nights blend together. Same shelves, same routine, same dull hum of the overhead lights. Hopefully something better comes along. I usually hang out in and stock the electronics section, which is nice because it's quieter than the other areas. People don't exactly come rushing in at 2 a.m. to buy phone chargers and Bluetooth speakers. Most of the customers are either night owls killing time or truckers grabbing last-minute supplies before heading back on the road. That's why I noticed him. At first, I didn't think much of it. Just another guy wandering the aisles, probably waiting for someone. But after a few minutes, I realized he wasn't shopping. He wasn't even pretending to. He just kept appearing. Every time I glanced up, he was lingering nearby, hovering in the next aisle over or standing a little too still by the clearance section. He wasn't looking at anything. He was just standing there, watching me. I told myself I was overthinking it. The store is big and maybe he was just taking his time. But the way he moved, always just close enough for me to notice, never actually picking anything up. It set something deep in my gut on edge. I was waiting for him to just get on with it and ask for my number, but he never approached me. It was like he wanted me to see him, which didn't make any sense to me. I went to radio someone about it, but realized that the batteries in my radio must have been dead because it wasn't working. Eventually, I started debating whether I should go find a manager when I felt a hand wrap around my arm. I nearly jumped out of my skin, but before I could react, a woman's voice rang out loud, friendly, overly familiar. She exclaimed, "There you are," before going on a little spiel about how she had been looking all over for me. I turned, completely thrown off, and saw a woman I had never seen before in my life. She was smiling, her grip firm on my arm, like we were old friends reuniting. Before I could say anything, she leaned in and whispered, her tone dropping to something low and urgent. "That guy's been recording you. Follow me." My stomach dropped. I turned my head slightly, just enough to glance back. The man was still there, only now, he wasn't even pretending to browse. He was staring right at me. A cold wave of fear crept over me. I let her pull me. I didn't even question it. The way she grabbed my arm, the way she spoke so loud and casually, like we were two old friends reuniting, I clung to it. I was beyond grateful that someone had realized what was going on and put herself in an uncomfortable position just to help me. She kept up the act as we walked, rambling about something, maybe a trip she had taken, maybe an inside joke we supposedly shared. I barely processed the words. My thoughts were stuck on him. Had he really been recording me? That was creepy as hell. I wanted to know if he was still following us, but I couldn't muster the courage to turn around just yet. The woman steered me through the aisles, moving fast. I barely noticed where we were going, only that we were going, that the distance between me and that man was growing. In all honesty, I was kind of expecting her to quit the pretending to know me at some point, but she kept it up. At one point, it was getting a little uncomfortable, so I glanced behind me, and to my relief, that man was no longer following. The woman kept pulling me forward, though. I told her that we were good now and that we should probably go find my manager, but she just squeezed my arm tighter, telling me that he was lurking somewhere. I thought to myself, so what? What's he gonna do in a store full of employees? I was obviously worried at first because no one was around, but now that I wasn't alone, I started realizing that there wasn't much of a point in being scared anymore. I told her this, but she continued moving. I told her I was serious and planted my feet, twisting my arm slightly to loosen her grip. "You can let go now," I said, but she didn't. She smiled at me, but something in it was off. "Come on, just a little further," she said, basically tugging me at that point. I glanced around. The store was basically dead. We had moved past the registers, past the self-checkout, past the aisles that saw the most foot traffic. The warehouse section loomed ahead, dimly lit and nearly empty. Beyond that was the side exit, the one without cameras, the one employees used for loading shipments. That's when it dawned on me. She was leading me straight to the exit. I didn't think. I screamed for help as I yanked my arm free of her grasp with all my might. She lost her grip just enough for me to pull free. I didn't waste another second. I turned and ran toward the front of the store. As I fled, she yelled out something behind me. She yelled for me to come back, followed by my name, which I hadn't given her. I kept running until I saw one of my coworkers who was running toward me, most likely reacting to my screaming. I told him to call security, which he promptly did. That woman was long gone, though. By the time I told my story to the security guards, that woman and that man were nowhere in sight. They reviewed the security footage, and just as I suspected, the woman and man walked into the store together. She had been with him the entire time. The man's face was clear as day in one of the frames, but hers was always turned away. I had a feeling she was the mastermind behind the whole thing, so I was infuriated that the cameras hadn't picked her face up. Every second of it had been planned. The police got involved, and the whole thing went down as a failed abduction attempt. I'm still waiting for a resolution about it. That man should definitely be easy to track down, given his face was caught on camera. I have no idea how that woman knew my name. That's what terrifies me the most. Those people hadn't just picked me at random. I was a direct target. My name is Thomas. I've been working the late shift at our local Burger King for about 2 years now. It's not glamorous, but it pays rent and the hours work for me. I'm a night owl anyway, so being behind the drive-thru window from 10 p.m. to 4 a.m. doesn't bother me the way it would most people. This all started maybe a month ago. I was working the drive-thru solo. We're usually understaffed after midnight, and that's when a car pulled up to the speaker. Male voice, pretty unremarkable. He ordered a large double Whopper with cheese meal with a Coke. It was pretty standard. The one notable thing about the encounter was when he went to pay, he only rolled the window down just enough to slide his card through, and his windows were tinted so I couldn't see his face. He paid and I handed him his receipt, but then he just drove off, like without stopping at the second window to grab his food. I waited there with his bag for a few minutes, wondering if he'd be coming back. Eventually, I just set the order aside and ended up eating it later. People do weird stuff sometimes, so I didn't think about it too much. About a week later, it happened again. It was the same order and the same exact thing happened. Someone paid at the first window and then drove off before picking up the food. I remember thinking, that's strange. Someone did the exact same thing last week. But I wasn't quite able to connect the dots at that point. I just figured it was a coincidence. It wasn't until it happened a third time that I realized it was the same person making these orders. At that point, I knew something weird was going on, but I wasn't going to complain. The food was made, paid for, and I was the one who got to enjoy it, so I kept eating the free Whopper meals and tried not to think too hard about why some random dude was essentially buying me dinner every few days. This went on for a few more weeks. The guy would show up every 4 or 5 days, always late, usually between 1 and 3 a.m., and always with the same order. I started to almost look forward to it in a weird way. Like, it's been a few days. Wonder if my mysterious benefactor is going to show up tonight. One night, I was working the speaker at around 2 a.m. when I heard that familiar voice through the speaker. I knew what was about to happen, and I was right. He ordered the same meal, which I knew I'd be eating. But this time, he said something else. Something that made me freeze up. He said, and I'll never forget this, "I hope you've been enjoying those Whoppers, Mr. Hurley." My last name is Hurley. I don't wear a name tag with my last name on it. It's not posted anywhere customers can see. There's no reason at all that this guy should know my last name. I just stood there for a second, not saying anything. My brain couldn't catch up. Then I started talking into the speaker, asking who this was, what he wanted, and how he knew my name. I must have said, "Who is this?" 4 or 5 times, but he never answered. And this time, he didn't even pull up to pay. I heard his engine rev, and then he was gone. I was rattled for the rest of my shift. There was nothing I could do, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very, very wrong. Little did I know, things were about to get much worse. When I got home after my shift, I found a note on my doorstep. It was a handwritten note that said, "I know what you did. You have 3 days." I just stood there staring at it with my hands shaking, and I started feeling really, really sick, like someone had punched me in the gut. I have no idea what I supposedly did. I've been racking my brain trying to think of anything that could explain this, but I've got nothing. This sounds so stupid, but I don't have enemies or secrets. I'm a 24-year-old guy that works at Burger King and plays video games on his days off. I'm not exactly living the most exciting life. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I just sat on my couch with the lights on, dreading whatever was going to happen next. But nothing happened. I had no choice but to just move on. It turned out I wouldn't have to wait that long, because the next night at work, that guy was back. This time, he didn't even bother playing games. Instead of ordering food, he just asked me to write something down. Then, before I could even respond, he gave me an address. It was some random place on the outskirts of town, in an area I didn't recognize. And then he told me I had 2 days to deliver him $10,000. I damn near laughed at that. I didn't think he was serious, but he clearly wasn't kidding. As soon as he drove off, I immediately went back to being terrified. There was absolutely no way I'd be giving that guy $10,000. I didn't even have $10,000. I still don't. So I decided to ignore it. I figured it had to be some elaborate scam or prank from someone I knew. I should have called the police right then, but I didn't even think of that. 3 nights later, I thought things were over. I hadn't dropped any money off and nothing had happened. But of course, I was wrong. I was sitting there watching TV, winding down from my shift, when out of nowhere, I was jolted up by the sound of shattering glass. I hit the floor on instinct, thinking someone was shooting at me. But when I finally got up and looked around, I realized someone had just thrown a rock through my window. By the time I went to look outside, whoever had been there was long gone. This time, I called the police. I told them everything, including the address I had been given, and they said they'd check it out and told me to stay vigilant. They really didn't do much, they just told me they'd patrol the area a little more closely, and that without any doorstep footage, which I obviously don't have, there was nothing they could do. And that was 3 days ago. I've called in sick to work the last 3 nights, but I don't even think that's going to do anything since the guy clearly knows where I live. I can't afford to not work, and I can't afford to move, so I'm stuck in this nightmare until the police can track that person down. I think I might try getting them to track the credit card number that the guy used to pay for the Whopper meals, but other than that, I'm not really sure what to do. Why I got targeted, I have no idea. Hopefully things don't escalate from here. I graduated from college about 8 months ago with a degree in communications, which, as I'm sure you can imagine, has been incredibly useful in helping me secure gainful employment. That's sarcasm, by the way. I'm still living with my parents, and I haven't been able to find a real job yet, so I'm off to a great start. In the meantime, I drive for Uber and Uber Eats, sometimes both in the same night, depending on what's popping. It's not a career, but it's money, and it lets me feel like I'm doing something productive while I figure my life out. I know that sounds kind of pathetic, but it's what I've got right now. I drive mostly on weekend nights, Friday and Saturday, usually from around 9 p.m. until 2 or 3 in the morning. That's when the surge pricing kicks in and the drunk college kids need rides home from the bars downtown. It's not technically a night shift, but it feels like one. This happened a few weeks ago. It was a Saturday night, maybe around 1:30, and I was about ready to call it. I was about to turn off the app when one more request came through. The pickup was downtown, which was fine, but the drop-off location was really far away, past the suburbs even. I almost declined it for that reason, but the fare was too good. The girl I picked up was completely normal. The drive took about 40 minutes. By the time I dropped her off, it was past 2, and then I was alone, out in the middle of absolutely nowhere with a 40-minute drive back to civilization. I turned the car around and started heading home. Not 10 minutes into the drive, I saw a car stopped in the middle of the road with its hazards on. I approached cautiously, and I realized there were 2 people standing in front of the car, waving their arms like they were trying to flag me down. My first instinct was actually not to stop, but I'm someone who can't just ignore a person in need. So against my better judgment, I decided to stop. I stopped the car about 20 feet away from them and rolled my window down a few inches. Just enough to hear them, but not enough for someone to reach inside. It was a middle-aged couple, which actually put me at ease a little. That is, until they started talking. The woman did most of the talking. She had this frantic energy about her, but also something that felt slightly rehearsed, like she'd given the speech before. She said they were warning drivers about a collapsed bridge ahead. She went on to say it happened earlier that day, and they'd almost driven right off themselves. She pointed down the road into the darkness, and said if I kept going that way, I'd end up in the river. So naturally, I asked them what I should do instead. The husband spoke of a turnoff that was about halfway between where we were and the bridge. He said it cut through the woods and that it would add some time to my drive, but it would get me back to the main highway without having to deal with the bridge. I thanked them and started driving. Something felt off. I didn't know what it was, but I knew one thing. I was going to trust my gut and just drive the way I had been intending to go. About a mile down the road, I saw the turnoff they'd been talking about. It was this narrow dirt path that disappeared into the trees, and it was barely wide enough for one car. I decided to keep driving, and a few minutes later, I reached the bridge. I slowed down a little, but it was fine. It wasn't collapsed for sure, and it didn't even look damaged at all. I drove across it without any issues and made it back to the main highway a few minutes later. Even though nothing happened, the experience stuck with me to the point where I didn't sleep well that night. I kept thinking about what would have happened if I'd followed that couple's instructions, if I'd turned down that dirt road alone in the middle of the night. A few days later, the curiosity got the better of me and I did something stupid. I drove back out there. It was the middle of the afternoon this time, broad daylight, which made me feel slightly less insane about the whole thing. I retraced my route from that night. Those people weren't there this time, obviously. When I got to the turnoff, that dirt path into the woods, I slowed down and pulled over. To my surprise, there was something new. There was a sign nailed to a tree right at the entrance of the path that simply said, "Dead End." That sign hadn't been there before. I would have definitely noticed it that night, even in the dark. Someone had put it up in the last few days. I sat in my car for a minute, staring at the path. In the daylight, it didn't look quite as ominous. It was just a narrow dirt road that disappeared into some dense trees. I wanted to explore it a little, but I was worried about my car getting stuck, so I decided to go it on foot. I'm not sure what I was expecting to find, but being that there was daylight out, I really wasn't scared at all. I turned off my engine. As soon as I stepped out of the car, though, I got a bad feeling. I stood there at the edge of the path, trying to see further down, but there wasn't much to see really. I don't know what it was, but something about standing there and actually being out in the open discouraged me from walking in. Things went from 0 to 100 in about 2 seconds. As I was turning around and walking back to my car, I heard a scream ring out behind me. It was this awful scream, definitely a woman's, and it came from somewhere deep in the woods down the path. I can't tell you how fast I was out of there. Before I could even think, I was already speeding away. I don't think I've ever been so scared before, and that was about 2 weeks ago. I haven't been back to that spot since, but here's the thing. I can't stop thinking about it. Part of me knows I should just leave it alone, but I've been thinking about asking one of my friends to come out there with me. If I do, I'll record a video and send it, but for now, all I can really do is wonder about that scream and those people. This happened a few winters ago when I was working overnight security for a commercial warehouse complex. I was 26 and had been doing the job for 8 months. The shift ran from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., and I was always the only employee on the site. There was a supervisor I could call if something went wrong, but for the most part, it was just me and the cameras. The complex was in an industrial area on the edge of a small city that didn't have much nightlife. Most nights followed the same routine. Clock in, do a walkthrough of the exterior, then settle into the security office to monitor the cameras. And every hour, another patrol. The warehouse stored mostly industrial equipment and bulk supplies, nothing particularly valuable. The night everything went sideways started pretty normally. It was cold enough for there to be snow falling, but nothing too heavy. I did my first patrol, everything was secure, and I went back to the office. Around 1:30 a.m., I got a motion alert on one of the loading dock cameras. This wasn't unusual. The system was sensitive, and wind or animals could trigger it. I pulled up the feed and watched for a minute, but everything looked normal. Just the empty dock and snow drifting past the floodlights. But the alerts kept coming. Every 10 or 15 minutes, the same camera would trigger. Each time I'd check the feed, and each time I'd see nothing. What started to bother me was that the movement always seemed to happen just at the edge of the frame, like something was there but not quite in view. By 2:30, I had maybe 6 or 7 alerts from the same camera. No other cameras were triggering, just that one. At 3 a.m., I went outside to check it myself. The snow had mostly stopped and the complex was dead silent. I walked the full perimeter of the dock area with my flashlight. I didn't see anything unusual. All the bay doors were closed and locked, and there were no footprints in the snow except for mine. I went back inside. About 20 minutes later, I heard a loud, metallic scraping sound, like something heavy being dragged across concrete. It came from inside the warehouse, somewhere deep in the building. I checked the interior cameras, but all 6 feeds showed empty aisles. I was starting to freak out a little bit because I started feeling like I was being toyed with or watched somehow. But still, I explained the noise away by chalking it up to the wind or something. An hour later, though, I heard it again. It was louder this time. The dragging sound, followed by a sharp bang, like something had struck one of the interior doors. I cycled through the cameras again. Nothing on 1 through 5. When I got to camera 6, though, the feed was black. Maybe 3 seconds of static, and then it came back. But something was different. The angle had shifted, just a few degrees to the left, like someone had bumped the camera or adjusted its position. At that point, I had no choice. I grabbed my flashlight and radio and headed into the warehouse. The interior was massive, probably 80,000 square feet of industrial shelving arranged in long aisles. During the day, it was bright and full of forklifts. At night, the overhead lights were dimmed to save power, casting everything in this yellowish half light. I was maybe halfway down the main aisle when I heard footsteps coming from somewhere to my left. It definitely sounded like someone, a person walking maybe 2 or 3 aisles over. As soon as I stopped, the footsteps stopped too. I stood there trying to control my breathing. I remember how tense it was, standing there in complete silence, waiting for a sound that I wasn't even sure would come. After what felt like forever, I couldn't take it anymore. I had to break the silence. In a firm voice, I announced my presence as security and insisted that whoever was there make things easy and reveal themselves. But of course, there was no response. The rest of that patrol was utterly terrifying. I was bracing myself for a fight or some kind of confrontation, and the longer I surveyed without finding anyone, the worse that feeling got. But I ultimately finished my patrol without seeing another person, which was arguably worse because I knew with 100% certainty that there was someone in there. I didn't see or hear anything for the rest of my shift, but that didn't make me feel any better. I actually felt somewhat guilty. My job was laughably simple, and I was messing it up in real time. But by the time 7 rolled around, I wanted nothing more than to just get out of there. I reported everything to my supervisor when he showed up on site. Maintenance did a full inspection, but didn't find anything either. Even after everything was double and triple checked, no one was able to identify the method of entry, and I could tell people didn't believe my story. Still though, that night remains one of the freakiest things that has ever happened to me. This memory still terrifies me, and outside of police and some close family, this is my first time fully revisiting it. A few years ago, I had gotten my first job at a 24-hour gym. At the time, I was in a gap year between high school and college, so I worked a lot of night shifts. The gym was open 24/7 and accessed by key card only, meaning often there were only 1 or 2 employees working. People could just check in, use the equipment, and leave. The whole facility pretty much managed itself. All entries, exits, and usage of equipment was processed digitally, so all I had to really do was sit in the office and keep an eye on the cameras. I would occasionally get up and walk around, do some light cleaning, and even talk to some of the guests. This was in a pretty bad part of town, but for the most part, everyone was nice and friendly, and it was one of those gyms where everyone kind of knows each other considering how few people really come in. This one night in particular, I was working from 8 p.m. until 6 a.m., which is generally a very long, boring shift, but everything that happened that night keeps me up at night to this day. It was around 2 a.m. when I had already done multiple rounds around the building and finished all routine paperwork. I was exhausted, so I just figured I'd sit down for a bit and monitor the cameras. Everything was normal at first. Not many people come in to work out in the middle of the night, but there were a couple regulars who came and went. I had worked here for a few months now, so almost everyone I recognized, except one man. I first noticed him when I saw him using a treadmill in the far corner. Normally this wouldn't catch my attention, as we have new guests from time to time. However, what really caught me off guard was how fast this man was running. I pulled up his treadmill number in the system, where I'm able to live monitor all equipment activity. He was running 9 miles per hour, which was impressive already, but what really shocked me was the fact that he never stopped. 10 minutes went by, then 15. He never slowed or stopped. I looked closer at the camera, and although I can't quite describe it in detail, this man was nothing short of unsettling. He was wearing ragged clothes, he had long, messy hair, and his face never moved once. He was just staring straight forward. Then I noticed his feet. He was barefoot. He had been running 9 miles per hour for 15 minutes barefoot, just staring into the distance. At this point in time, I was very weirded out, especially since he was now the only person in the building besides myself. I pulled myself together and realized that we do have a policy requiring shoes, so I decided I would use that as an excuse to go talk to him. Although his appearance really freaked me out, I got up the courage to leave the office and head out to talk to him. The machine he was on was located almost directly outside the employee hallway, and as soon as I turned that corner, my heart stopped. The treadmill was covered in blood. His feet were tearing apart as he ran. My heart dropped. Blood not only dripping, but splattering from his feet and ankles for every step he took. His face was still stone cold, staring straight ahead. His mouth was wide open as he ran. He looked like he was on every drug on the planet. At this point, I was terrified. He looked crazy enough to the point that my gut was telling me he was dangerous. However, I still mustered up the courage to yell at him to stop. I can't even remember exactly what I said, but I did have to raise my voice a bit so he would hear me over the thudding of his feet as he sprinted. He didn't say a word, or even turn his head for that matter. He just continued to sprint and stare forward with his mouth open. I yelled again, something along the lines of, "Hello, what are you doing?" He then muttered the words, "Are you there?" in the coldest, raspiest voice I've ever heard. He wasn't out of breath or even panting as he spoke. I told him to stop a few more times, and he repeatedly just said, "Are you there?" The pool of blood at the end of the conveyor was growing, and at this point, I just figured I'd call the cops. I went back to the office, picked up my phone, but before I called, I glanced at the monitors again. He was staring directly at the camera, sprinting, bleeding, mouth open, staring at the camera. I turned away and then heard him screaming from outside the door. He wasn't even screaming words, just screaming at the top of his lungs as he stared at me through the camera. Suddenly, he hopped off the treadmill. He didn't even turn it off, and he sprinted out of view of the camera. I immediately started clicking through the feed searching for him, but he was out of view of every camera we had in the building. I had checked every camera except one, the employee hallway. Sure enough, there he was, about 6 feet from the office door, just standing there. I don't even know how he had gotten into this hallway without a keycard, but I didn't hesitate to quickly lock the door. Almost 5 seconds after I locked it, the doorknob rattled. Now I was calling the cops. He started screaming again and shaking the door as I explained to dispatch what was happening. They told me police were 5 minutes out, as I just waited in the corner of the office while this man was trying to get inside. His scream was terrifying. It was so deep it barely sounded human, and he kept it up for an unbelievably long time. This went on for about 3 minutes. I thought if he got in here I was gonna die, and I felt absolutely helpless. Suddenly though, the screaming stopped and the door didn't move. I checked the cameras again and he was gone. I couldn't see him anywhere. Eventually, the police arrived and I made them search the entire place before I would even leave the office. They told me he was nowhere to be found. I answered their questions and drove home. I quit the next day and have not entered that gym since. I have no idea what that man wanted, or what kind of crazy he was. I still wonder what would have happened if I didn't lock that door. There's a quick check off the highway not too far away from where I live. It's the only thing open 24/7 in my rural, middle-of-nowhere town. It's about a 25-minute drive if I'm speeding, which I usually am, so to translate for all you city folk, it's basically right next door. My sleep schedule is beyond atrocious. so I've been to that quick check more than a handful of times. I like to think I'm pretty generic looking and nondescript, meaning I blend in well, but it wouldn't surprise me if some of the late night workers recognize me by now. This happened just last week, so most of the details are still painfully fresh in my mind. It was past midnight, and I was coding on my laptop. My productivity and focus peak between the hours of 9 p.m. and 3 a.m., so I was in that flow state that any hard worker craves. The problem with late night grinding is that you go from perfectly comfortable to dying of hunger in a matter of minutes, which is exactly what prompted me to shut things down and grab something to eat around the reasonable hour of 2 a.m. Just so you have an understanding of everything, I should mention that the highway leading to the quick check is more of a local road than an interstate, so it's usually pretty dead. The ride there was relatively uneventful. I pulled into the quick check, ordered a sandwich from one of the counters, and roamed the aisles while I waited. The mix of caffeine I'm usually stimmed out on and the ADHD I was born with makes it difficult for me to sit still, so I was just kind of pacing around one of the corners of the store when I noticed something. Facing one of the refrigerators that lined the back of the store was a person sitting crisscross on the ground. It was such an odd sight that I initially overlooked it, then snapped my head back around to make sure I hadn't imagined it. And I hadn't. There was literally a person sitting on the ground at the end of the aisle, facing the refrigerator like he was examining it. I couldn't see anything other than the brown coat and jeans he was wearing. I needed to get a better look at this guy. At his face, at least. So I walked a few aisles down. My plan was to turn the corner really quickly, get a good look at him, then turn back up one of the aisles, ideally before he noticed me looking. Staring at strangers so explicitly is obviously really rude, so I didn't want him to catch me doing it. I was trying to be inconspicuous about it, or at least appear like I was browsing the snacks, but I guess I didn't do a good job of that, because as soon as I turned the corner to look at him, he whipped his head around and stared back at me. His movement was so abrupt that I actually froze up for a few seconds, forgetting what I was even doing there in the first place. And let me tell you, one look at this guy confirmed he was far from normal. Forget about the sitting on the ground and staring into the refrigerator. This guy was definitely on something, which I could tell from his abnormally wide eyes and the way his lip was vibrating, like it was fully quivering, almost as if he were cold, except it was actually kind of hot in there, and he was also wearing a jacket. His posture was all twisted up too, like he was straining instead of sitting, if that makes any sense. But the worst thing by far was the look he was giving me. He wasn't smiling, and he wasn't scowling either. He was staring blankly at me with this dead-eye stare that made it kind of seem like he actually was dead. The whole scene was freaky as hell. After staring at each other for an uncomfortable amount of time, I finally averted my eyes and dipped up one of the aisles, eager to get my food and leave. It wasn't ready yet, though. I stood at the counter and waited. The anxiety was getting to me. So I angled myself to face the corner of the store where the guy had been sitting. I was half expecting him to emerge from one of the aisles, at which point I'm not sure what I would have done, but he never did. Eventually, my food was ready. I promptly left the store without another thought. I thought that was the end of it, but as I was turning to get back on the highway, I saw something move out of the corner of my eye. I glanced back towards the store and saw a person running full speed from the store entrance to the far end of the parking lot. I was already halfway onto the highway at that point, but as soon as I saw what looked like a brown coat, I knew it was him. As I drove past the quick check, I looked over at it one more time to see that guy was now jumping into a truck. I didn't even want to imagine what a guy like that could possibly be rushing to do at 2 a.m. I was just happy I had nothing to do with it. I sped off, just wanting to get home in peace. After a few minutes, the last of the fluorescent storefront lights faded into darkness behind me, and I was driving through desolate nothingness once again. I'm used to being the only car on the road when it's that late at night, which is why it was so surprising when I noticed headlights in my rearview mirror, but it was even more surprising when I realized the headlights were getting closer, meaning they were going faster than me, and I wasn't exactly driving the speed limit. My first thought was that I was about to get pulled over, so I instinctively slowed down a bit. The headlights kept approaching, and I knew what was about to happen. Police lights were about to start flashing, and my night was about to be ruined. But once the car finally got close enough, I realized it wasn't a cop. It was that guy from the quick check. It was the same car from the parking lot. I've never been more certain of anything in my life. I slammed my foot back on the gas and got back up to speed. The guy behind me started flashing his lights at me and honking, and I didn't know what to do. Try and outrun him or pull over and just pray that he'd keep going. I was in a sedan and he was driving a pickup truck, so I figured I could outrun him. The faster I went though, the more terrified I became. I can only describe that feeling as true terror, the feeling that you're literally approaching death. By the time I'd gotten up to 100 miles per hour, the voice in my head was screaming that I was going to die if I kept accelerating. I swerved into the right lane, hoping he'd shoot by me, but instead, he actually swerved to stay behind me. I started slowing down with the intention of pulling over on the shoulder, but the moment I took my foot off the gas, the truck actually rammed into me. I grabbed the wheel to stabilize the car and realized I was in a life or death situation. The guy tailing me was trying to kill me. Everything was happening so fast. I couldn't think. I knew he was going to try ramming me again, and at that speed, I knew I would be lucky not to spin out. I don't know if it was the terror or my survival instincts kicking in, but the moment I saw him go for it, I swerved to the left and slammed on the brakes. The truck shot past me, and I watched as he swerved back and forth a few times before spinning out and shooting off the highway into the field. Despite how violently my hands were shaking and how terrified I was, I forced myself to start driving again. I sped the entire way home. As soon as I got inside, I called the police and reported the incident, although it's not like I could precisely describe where everything had gone down. They took my statement anyway, and I was happy to give it. I know for a fact that Quick Check had security cameras in their parking lot, so I'm pretty confident they'll end up catching that guy. It's only been a week since this happened, but I haven't heard anything yet. My car isn't dinged up too badly, but I still need to get it repaired. As for why in the world that guy had gone after me, your guess is as good as mine. I just hope I never see him again. This happened in the summer of 2022. I was 25 and working what I guess you'd call an unusual logistics job. I was hauling refurbished electronics and custom PC parts for this last-mile delivery startup that was trying to compete with Amazon in weird rural markets. The routes were long and completely erratic. Sometimes I'd be driving for 12 hours straight, often through the night, hitting these remote parts of the Southwest that most delivery companies refuse to touch. The pay was decent enough to make it worth it, and I didn't mind the long drive since I had grown up in a road-tripping type family. This particular night, I was deep into the final leg of a Phoenix to Lovington run. It was around 1 in the morning, and I was winding through this desolate stretch of Route 82, past the outskirts of Lincoln National Forest in southern New Mexico. If you've never driven through that area at night, it's hard to describe how isolated it feels. The road is narrow and poorly lit. You might see another car every 20 or 30 minutes if you're lucky, but here's the thing about that particular stretch. It's also the only accessible route cutting through the area for miles. The GPS alternatives would add like 2 hours to the trip, winding you way north through Carrizozo or something like that. So if you needed to get from point A to point B in that part of New Mexico, you pretty much have to take Route 82. Anyway, I was listening to some true crime podcasts when I rounded this bend and saw a red hatchback awkwardly pulled onto the gravel shoulder with its hazards flashing. I slowed down a bit out of habit. As I got closer, my headlights illuminated a woman standing next to the car. She was holding her phone high in the air like she was trying to catch a signal. My first instinct was to just drive past. I mean, I'm not heartless, but I'm also not naive about the kinds of situations you can walk into in that part of the state at that time of night. But then I started thinking about my own girlfriend or my sister and how I would want someone to stop if they were stranded in the middle of nowhere. Plus, I wasn't completely defenseless. I had a Glock 43 holstered just under my steering column. I never explicitly got permission from the company to arm myself, but given some of the areas we delivered to, it seemed like common sense to me. I slowed down and cracked the passenger window a couple inches. The woman, who didn't seem much older than me, rushed over immediately and tried my passenger door handle, which was locked. She said she needed a ride to the nearest gas station and claimed her car had just died and she couldn't get anyone on the phone. Her voice had this jittery quality to it, like she was either really stressed or maybe on something. I hesitated for a few seconds. The situation felt a little off, but what tipped the scale was knowing I had a firearm within reach. I figured if things got sketchy, I'd be able to handle myself, so I unlocked the door. She got in quickly and gave me this vague and slightly slurred "thank you so much" without really looking at me. The way she slurred her words made me think she was drunk or maybe a little tipsy, which made me a little cautious. Before driving away, I asked her some obvious questions. Had she hit something, or did the engine cut out, that sort of thing. But she kept deflecting, repeatedly asking me to just drive. Nothing she said really made sense, and I was leaning towards kicking her out of my car the more she talked. I was about to make a decision when I glanced over at her car one more time. To my horror, a man stepped out from behind it like he had been hiding there the whole time. The adrenaline started to kick, and I turned to face forward. There was another figure that had stepped directly in front of the road, about 50 feet in front of us. There was something long in his hands, maybe a bat or a pipe. I couldn't tell exactly. He started moving toward my car, and that's when my survival instinct took over. I floored it. I didn't even try to be subtle about it. The woman whipped around to look back and immediately started yelling. Then she reached down and started digging around in her purse for something. I had a feeling I knew what she was looking for, so before things could escalate, I yelled at her to freeze and drew my gun. I didn't point it at her, but instead just rested it on the steering wheel so she could see it. Whatever she had been reaching for, she stopped immediately. I told her not to move, and she didn't. To my surprise, she stopped talking too. She just stared straight ahead with this expression I couldn't read. Luckily for her, we were less than 30 minutes from Artesia. After a somewhat tense half hour, I pulled into a gas station. There were 2 other vehicles in the lot, both big rigs. I told her to get out. She refused at first and gave me some stupid reason I can't remember, but I leaned across her, yanked the passenger door open, and basically forced her out of the truck. She stumbled back and fell onto the pavement, all the while yelling something completely incomprehensible. Someone started jogging over, probably one of the truckers, and I could already envision the accusations that were about to fly. All that guy had seen was me throwing a woman out of the car, and I didn't want to deal with the situation for a second longer, so I didn't. I yelled out a warning to him about her ill intentions, but that was all I was going to do. Then I peeled out of the lot before that guy could approach me and didn't look back. I drove to another gas station and started filling my tank. Then I walked over to the passenger side to inspect the seat. Buried between the seat cushions was a burner phone battery and a sealed pack of zip ties. I didn't even want to think about it. I tossed all of it in the trash and got back on the road, eager to be done with the journey. I never reported any of it, not to the police and definitely not to my company. Not because I didn't think it was worth reporting, but because, legally speaking, I didn't really want to explain to a bunch of cops why I was driving around armed or why I'd physically removed someone from my car. I'm not going to get into it, but you can connect the dots on that one yourself. One thing's for sure though, being armed that night may have very well saved my life. This happened about 3 years ago when my husband and I were driving cross-country from Utah to Georgia. Although the route we had mapped out wasn't the most direct, it passed through some places my husband really wanted to visit. The downside of that, though, was that we'd be cutting through some pretty desolate stretches of highway. The worst part was this section of western Kansas along US Route 400, basically 100 miles of nothing but farmland. We'd been driving for most of the day, and I had fallen asleep in the passenger seat sometime around sunset. I'm one of those people who can sleep anywhere in a moving car, so I was out cold for a few hours. Around 10 at night, I woke up to the car slowing down and realized my husband had pulled into this tiny gas station off the side of the highway. My husband said he was going to grab some snacks and fill up the tank. I figured it might have been my last chance for a while to use a real bathroom, so I got out and headed inside. I didn't bother bringing my phone or purse with me. I was just going to be in and out, so I didn't really see the need. The cashier was this older guy who didn't even look up when I walked in. The bathrooms were tucked down this narrow side hallway toward the back of the store. As I opened the women's restroom door, I almost bumped right into this woman who was coming out of one of the stalls, which wouldn't have been that noteworthy were it not for what she looked like. She had messy, unkempt gray hair that frankly looked kind of disgusting and oddly sticky. She was also wearing these foam flip-flops that made this soft slapping sound when she walked. As if that wasn't bizarre enough, what stood out the most was this thick purple and green coat she was wrapped in. Let me remind you, we were in Kansas in the middle of summer, and it was probably 80 degrees out. She was carrying this tied-up plastic grocery bag, and when she saw me, she just stared. Not like a normal, oh excuse me kind of look, but this locked-on stare that felt weirdly expectant, like she was waiting for me to say or do something specific. I didn't know what I was expected to do, so I just gave her a polite nod and tried to step around her, but she didn't exactly rush to let me through. I figured that was the end of it, that she'd leave me and I could get on with my life. But no. Instead of leaving, the woman actually turned around to follow me and stepped toward the sink area. But she didn't turn on the water or look in the mirror or do any of the normal things you'd do at a sink. She just stood there with her arms at her sides, like she was again waiting for me to do something. I was already feeling uneasy, so I went into the nearest stall and locked it. The second I sat down, I immediately regretted not bringing my phone or anything with me. I had no way to text my husband if something went wrong, and I was starting to get the feeling that something was definitely off about this woman. I sat there for what felt like a few minutes, just waiting for her to leave. Eventually, I heard the soft slap of her flip-flops moving toward the door, then the sound of the bathroom door opening and slamming shut. I waited a few extra moments to make sure she was really gone, and then I realized something. I could still hear breathing. Not my own, someone else's, coming from somewhere in the bathroom. It dawned on me that she had faked leaving. She must have opened and slammed the door to make it seem like she left, but she was still in there, standing silently somewhere near the exit, probably in the corner by the door, just out of my line of sight. I didn't move. I sat in complete silence for a really long time, trying to quiet my breathing because I was terrified at the thought of her hearing me. The whole time, I kept thinking about how stupid I was for not bringing my phone. Eventually, the door was opened and closed again. The breathing stopped too, which sent a wave of relief over me. I still wasn't completely convinced though, so I waited for another half-minute or so. Just as I was about to unlock the stall, I heard a huge gasp, like someone had just been holding their breath, followed by the bathroom door opening and closing again. That's when I truly started freaking out. That woman had pretended to leave the bathroom twice. I had absolutely no idea what she wanted, but the fact that she was playing these games with me made it clear that whatever it wasn't good. I didn't know what to do. Part of me was sure she was gone, but if she had pretended to leave twice, it wasn't crazy to assume she had done it a third time. Finally, the suspense was killing me and I couldn't take it anymore. I unlocked the stall as quietly as I could and stepped out, fully expecting to see her standing there, but the bathroom was empty. I washed my hands as quickly as possible and stepped out of the bathroom. I had no idea where the woman had gone or if she was waiting for me somewhere else in the store. When I got back to the main part of the store, there was this large man checking out at the counter. I lingered by one of the racks near the front until he finished his transaction and walked out. Then I used him as cover to exit the store. I figured if the woman was waiting outside, at least there would be another person around. Part of me thought I was being overly paranoid, but that thought was shattered the moment I stepped outside. As soon as I exited the store, I saw her again. She was lingering off to the side of the front entrance of the store, this time clearly glaring at me. She was holding something in her hand that I couldn't quite make out. It looked like a knife, but I wasn't sure. The way she was holding it though, and the way she was slightly crouched, like she was preparing to spring, honestly made it seem like she was about to attack me. I prepared myself to have to scream or run or even fight, but instead of moving towards me, the woman quickly turned and walked around the side of the building toward the back. I ran to our car and got in as fast as I could. My husband looked confused and asked what had taken me so long. I told him I'd explain once we were back on the road. He didn't question me and just pulled away. As we were leaving, I looked back and saw the woman standing at the edge of the building, watching our car. I don't know why, but seeing her made me so unsettled and uncomfortable. I told my husband everything, and he kinda got mad at me for not bringing my phone with me to call him for help, which was fair. But that was that, and the two of us agreed to try and forget about the whole thing and go back to enjoying ourselves. I will say that I don't use roadside restrooms anymore, which I'm not in the slightest bit upset about. This happened to me in 2020. I was 24 at the time, working for a small logistics company. My job was to deliver automotive parts between cities in the Midwest. Most of the time it was easy work, long drives, decent pay, and nobody breathing down my neck. But that job is also the reason I will never stop at a highway rest area after dark again. It was mid-January, freezing cold, the kind of night where even the dashboard lights feel too bright. I was driving along the I-80 heading east from Des Moines, on my way to deliver a package to Davenport. The drive was about 3.5 hours. I'd left around 8 p.m., and by 10:30 I was in the middle of nowhere. Just the sound of the tires on the asphalt and the occasional semi blowing by in the opposite lane. Around that time, I started to get really drowsy. My eyelids felt heavy, and I could feel myself zoning out. I spotted one of those blue rest area 1 mile signs and decided to pull off for a few minutes to stretch my legs and grab a drink from the vending machine. The rest stop looked completely deserted. A few dim streetlights, a small brick building with restrooms, and about a dozen parking spaces. Only one other vehicle was there, an old white van parked way off at the end of the lot, lights off. I parked under one of the lights, locked the truck, and went inside. The men's room smelled faintly of cleaning solution and mildew. The heater was making a weird rattling noise. I washed my face with cold water to wake up, and when I looked up into the mirror, I thought I heard the door open behind me. I turned, but no one was there. I stood still for a second, just listening, but there was nothing but the hum of the heater. I figured it was just the wind and finished up quickly. When I stepped outside, I noticed something that made me stop. The white van's headlights were now on. The engine wasn't running, but the lights were on. I didn't remember hearing it start. I got this bad feeling immediately. I unlocked my truck fast, then I climbed in and started the engine. I pulled out of the parking space and headed toward the exit. As I did, the van's lights suddenly shut off again. I remember thinking maybe someone was sleeping in there and just accidentally hit the lights. But as I got back on the highway, I kept checking my mirrors. For about 5 minutes, nothing happened. Then, in the distance behind me, I saw headlights, 2 small dots getting closer. It was the van. At first, I wasn't sure, but as it got closer, I could see it was the same boxy white van. No company logo, no side windows, just a dirty cargo van. It caught up to me fast and got right on my tail. I was already going about 75, but the van stayed inches behind my bumper. Then it switched lanes, sped up beside me, and matched my speed. The driver rolled down his window halfway. I could barely see his face, just a shadow and maybe a baseball cap. He motioned for me to roll mine down, but I didn't. He kept gesturing and then pointed at my truck bed, like he was trying to tell me something was wrong. At first, I hesitated. Maybe one of my straps had come loose or something fell out, but then I noticed something that didn't make sense. There was nothing in the bed of the truck. It was completely empty. That's when I realized he wasn't trying to warn me. I kept driving, pretending not to notice him, but he started honking and drifting closer to my lane. I swerved slightly to keep distance, and he sped ahead, cutting in front of me. For a second, I thought he was going to slam on the brakes, but then, without warning, he veered onto the shoulder and came to a full stop. I flew past him, my heart pounding. I stayed in the fast lane, going nearly 90 now, just trying to get away. A few seconds later, I checked my mirror again. The van was back on the road. It followed me for another 20 miles. Sometimes it would fade back until I couldn't see it. Then out of nowhere, it would speed up again and appear right behind me. I decided I needed to stop somewhere public. The next sign said there was a truck stop 5 miles ahead. I took that exit first, pulled into the lot, and parked right under a bright light near the diesel pumps. There were a few semis lined up, and I could see a few drivers inside through the windows of the diner next door. The van didn't pull in immediately. I waited maybe 2 minutes. Then it came slowly up the ramp and into the lot. I got out of my truck and headed straight into the diner. As soon as I walked in, the bell above the door rang, and the woman behind the counter looked up. She was maybe in her 50s. I told her that a van had been following me for the last half hour, and she must have seen how shaken I was because she called over the trucker sitting at the counter. This guy stood up, huge guy, flannel shirt, gray beard. He walked outside with me, and the second we stepped out, we saw the van idling at the far end of the lot, just sitting there, facing my truck. The trucker muttered something like, "Yeah, that ain't good," and told me to go back inside. He walked straight toward the van. I didn't hear what he said, but a few seconds later, the van suddenly reversed, swung around, and peeled out of the lot, heading back toward the highway. The trucker came back, shaking his head. He said there were 2 guys in there, both wearing hoodies, both just staring straight ahead, not saying a word. I stayed in that diner for almost an hour, until I was sure they were gone. I finished the rest of my drive with my eyes glued to the rearview mirror. When I got back to Davenport, I parked under the hotel lights and checked my truck. Everything was fine, but there were 2 smudges on the tailgate, like someone had tried to open it with dirty hands. I quit that job a few months later. Now, every time I drive long distance, I fill up before dark, bring snacks, and I don't stop unless it's somewhere crowded and open 24 hours. Because I know for a fact, if I had rolled down that window or pulled over when they told me to, I wouldn't be here telling this story.
So we were having our Christmas Eve dinner. Turkey, stuffing, and other dishes that you would expect to get on Thanksgiving night. We don't have a big family. It was my grandparents and uncles from my mom's side of the family. At the time, we lived in a duplex with some guy and his girlfriend on the other side. We never really saw them much. Strangely, we had a door that connected our sides, and no, that's not something that most duplexes have. It had a very unique kind of lock though. It had to be unlocked from both sides to be opened, and it could open in either direction. I only saw it open once before the 2 moved in, ever since the door had been locked, at least on our side. While we were sitting at the dinner table eating, the doorknob to the door that separates the sides of our duplex twisted and turned before the lock would block it. It was not accidental, as it was going on for at least 10 seconds. My dad got up and walked over to the door, placed one hand on the lock and one hand on the doorknob. "You need something?" There was no answer. He unlocked our side of the door and swung it open. Their side of the duplex was completely pitch black. It seemed as if nobody was home. It was only about 6 o'clock, and we were certain we saw them leaving earlier. Me and my dad went to check out the window, and their car was gone too. Being good neighbors, we assumed the worst, that there may have been an intruder, so me, my dad, and my uncle went to the other side to investigate. We flipped on all the lights and checked every corner and every crevice of the small first floor. Then we heard a thud and a crack from upstairs. It was pressure on the floorboards. I was freaked out, so I stayed behind while my dad and uncle ran upstairs. I felt my heart skip a beat when a huge commotion erupted from upstairs, before the scream from my uncle echoed across the duplex even to the other side as my whole family got up from the table now. Moments later, my dad came rushing down with my uncle beside him, with his hand covering his lower shoulder or chest area. There was a stab wound. We all hurried back to our side of the apartment and locked the door. We dialed 911 and simultaneously heard rapid stomping coming from the other side, and then heavy banging and ramming into the door to the point where there were small chips and cracks forming. We could hear the grunting and screaming of the man as he rammed into the door. My other uncle and my dad each grabbed kitchen knives. I armed myself as well. They told all of us to stand back while they waited by the door. Thankfully, the man on the other side gave up before the door gave in, and we heard him exit out the front door. We watched through the window, and we all saw his face as he ran through the snow and turned to see us through the glass. He took off in his black Honda Civic down the slushy roads. It doesn't end there. The following year, the same neighbors still lived there, and they seemed to be having a Christmas get-together with a few people. By chance, I was looking out my bedroom window, being a sketchy snoop, when I recognized one of their guests to be the same man who had allegedly broken into their side of the duplex. When I told my dad, he agreed, and we approached them about it. He denied any knowledge of what we said, and even our neighbors defended him, saying he was from out of state. There was nothing we could do for proof, but we knew one thing. Those neighbors, for whatever reason, set that up. We moved out about a month later after our new-grown fear of those neighbors became too much. This happened when I was only 5 years old. It was Christmas Eve night, meaning I guess it was technically Christmas, and I had awoken at probably 3 a.m. or something. I walked downstairs to the living room out of my little boy curiosity to see if Santa had delivered any presents yet. The tree was full of presents underneath already. I was so happy. Santa had come already. But what was this? There was someone in the kitchen going through the fridge. I remember stepping into the kitchen and seeing a really tall man going through the fridge chugging a milk carton. When he spotted me, he put the carton back in the fridge and shut the door. He then put his fingers on his lips to tell me to be quiet. Are you Santa? I asked him. Yes, I am, he told me quietly. He walked past me, patted me on the head, and stepped into the living room next to the tree. I don't know what I was thinking, even at 5 years old, as he wasn't wearing anything even resembling Santa. He looked around at all the gifts. I thanked him for all the presents as he began picking up the bigger boxes. I remember being confused, and I'm pretty sure I asked him why he was doing what he was doing, but I don't remember exactly what he said. I believe it was along the lines of just replacing the gifts with better ones in my sled. I believed whatever he said though. He walks out the back door with 3 boxes, came back momentarily to grab more, then left once again. He came back in and patted me on the back and told me not to tell my parents that I saw him. I smiled and agreed, and he took off with the boxes. I waited for him to come back with the replacement gifts, but he never did. I eventually went up to tell my parents despite what he said. When my parents realized I wasn't joking, they sat up in shock and fear and ran past me downstairs. When they saw half the presents were gone and the back door was left wide open, my mom screamed like a deranged person. I remember my parents were practically scolding me, demanding for me to describe the person who entered our house. Of course, being 5 years old, the description I gave was anything but useful. All I probably told them was that he was tall. It's been almost 15 years now though, and at this point for me, being that I was only 5 years old, it's nothing but a story to tell, rather than a bad memory at all. Did you ever used to have a fear of those guys who would dress up as Santa Claus in the mall or at Christmas parties? Up until the age of about 8, I certainly did. I think I was 6 or 7 years old when me and my mom were walking through the mall with all of the Christmas festivities and decorations up. Festive bands playing jingle bells, a giant tree in the center of the mall, and of course a mall Santa sitting in a chair covered by a green blanket. There was a small line of kids and parents waiting to sit on the Santa's lap, maybe 2 or 3 kids. My mom insisted I sat on his lap. Normally it would be the other way around, the kid begging the parent to sit on the lap, but she knew how shy I was. There wasn't anyone by the mall Santa's side, like one of those people who calls the next child up. It was just him. When I sat on the stranger's lap, he grabbed me by the chest and said softly in my ear, "What do you want for Christmas?" I think I said a Game Boy Advance. He laughed and assured me I would receive one. Then, for whatever reason, my mom walked up to the Santa and said something quietly to him. He chuckled in response to whatever she said and then said no problem. My mom told me to wait there by the Santa for a few minutes until she came back. At this point, there were no more kids waiting to sit on his lap, so his attention was directed at me. He told me to come over and sit on his lap again. I somehow obeyed, despite my fear of Santa Claus. When I sat on his lap, He pulled me closer to him so that my back was leaning on him. When I think back on this moment now, it's all the more painful and creepy. He then whispered in my ear that he had a Game Boy Advance outside by his sled, and if I followed him, I would get it right now and wouldn't have to wait until Christmas. My fear suddenly turned to excitement as I believed him. We both stepped off the chair, and I followed him down one of the exit hallways, but halfway through, he stopped and told me we should take a bathroom break first. We stepped into the bathroom, and he quickly locked the door. I turned and looked at him as he looked at me. But before anything else could happen, there was a frantic banging at the door. Somebody on the other side was yelling to open up. The Santa opened the door and a man pulled him out and shoved him. The man then escorted me back to the center of the mall, asking me where my mom went. I watched as a fake Santa casually walked out the exit door and out of my sight. When my mom came back, the man explained everything. I'm pretty sure he was watching the whole time. So he and my mom asked around to see if the mall hired any mall Santas for the day. They did not. Whoever that was just a pervert dressed as Santa to get kids to sit on his lap and possibly wait for a perfect opportunity to snatch one, just like he almost did me. This story took place about 5 years ago on Christmas Eve night. It was around 1 in the morning, and I had just finished placing presents under the tree. I went upstairs to brush up and everything, then came back downstairs to the kitchen to get a glass of water before bed. My son Jake, who was 4 at the time, was standing by the stairs leading to the basement. I asked him what he was doing up so late. He pointed down the stairs and said, "Santa." I picked him up and carried him back to his room. I took a glass of water and went to bed. I woke up around an hour later to my son running down the hall outside my room. I sighed and got out of bed. As I was going down the stairs, I saw Jake by the tree looking at presents. Then he ran past me into the basement stairs again. He pointed down the stairs again. This time I looked down the stairwell, and my heart dropped as I saw a black figure sitting on the bottom step. I almost screamed, but I somehow held it in. I pulled my son quietly away from the basement door and closer to the front door of the house. I moved my hand away from my son's mouth to reach for the lock in the doorknob. I tried to pull the door open as quietly as possible, but it was pointless. The squeaky hinges let out the usual ear-piercing screeches, and I cringed in my mouth and eyes as I did. Suddenly, there were heavy stomps coming from up the basement stairs. I screamed and pushed open the storm door and practically threw Jake outside. I shut both doors behind us and we ran to the neighbor's house. I rang the doorbell as fast as possible, probably 30 times before they answered. After that, we went inside and stayed there and waited for the police. Whoever that person was gone though, as determined after the police conducted a thorough investigation of the house. I ended up lying to Jake, telling him that actually was Santa Claus, but a few years later, he remembered the incident and became a little more wise to what actually happened.
I live in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia. It was a Tuesday night. I was laying on my bed trying to get some sleep. I laid there for about 3 hours until I decided to get up and take a walk around my neighborhood just to clear my head. It was 2 in the morning. I was walking down the street when I remembered there's an abandoned building in our neighborhood. I decided to visit it. People say that this building is haunted, and I've always wanted to see what's inside of it. The building itself looked really creepy. Broken windows, a huge metal door which said no entry with red paint. As an 18-year-old college student, I wanted to be adventurous. I climbed through one of the broken windows and got inside the building. I took out my phone and started to record so I could show off in front of my friends. Just to let you guys know, my phone works completely fine. There's no problem with it. The place was really dark. The only source of light in that building was from my phone. It took me a couple of seconds to realize I was inside a small room. I walked out the door into the hallway, It was an apartment. I was doing commentary while recording to make it look cool. I got out of the apartment and into the main hall of the building. Here's a picture of the main hall. On the left side of the elevator, there's a small passageway which leads to a really small room under the stairs, as seen in this picture. I went there to investigate. When I got close to the room, I heard a clicking noise from the first door. I was frozen for a split second. I walked back to the main hall still recording. Then I heard a loud sound of metal dropping on concrete. I almost crapped my pants. I wanted to get the hell out of there, but something inside me told me to go upstairs and find out what it was. I started walking up the stairs as slowly as I could. I don't even know what I was expecting to see up there. I got to the first floor. As usual, it was dark, but it got colder. This event took place in the middle of August, so it was hot outside. I'm into paranormal stuff, and when I suddenly felt cold, I firmly believed something was going on here. I should have turned back, but I still wanted to see where that sound came from. There were 4 apartments on each floor. I investigated all 4 of them and saw nothing. A chill ran down my spine when I realized the whole second floor and the ground floor were covered in sand. There was no concrete and no sign of anything metal. The cold temperature on the floor and the fact that I was alone gave me the chills. I hurried down the stairs, made my way back to the apartment, climbed out through the window, and ran back to my home. When I got home, I drank gallons of water, calmed myself down, and took out my phone. I wanted to hear that sound again, so I played the video, and to my horror, the audio on the video was messed up. My commentary wasn't there at all. Like I said earlier, there's no problem with my phone. It works fine. I didn't get any sleep that night. I told my friends about it, and they told me that it was really stupid to go inside that building alone. I didn't delete the video. I decided to keep it as a memory. Fast forward to December. I was going through my gallery, and I came across that video. I decided to play it. I fast forwarded to the part where I heard the sound, and surprisingly, that sound is clearly heard in the video. I don't know how it could be heard clearly, but here's a small clip from the video. I got goosebumps and closed my phone. I promised myself not to go near that building ever again. Let me start out by saying I was a non-believer of the paranormal until this night. I was with 4 buddies. I won't list any names for safety reasons. We went to hang out and talk in an old, supposedly haunted trailer late at night. The owner and multiple people who lived there all told me that it was haunted by demons, and me being the new guy to the group, I needed to be initiated. This initiation consisted of walking into the haunted back room. I did as they said after they convinced me, and walked in and then quickly ran out. My friends thought it was hilarious and went to prove to me that it was all not real. I went behind them to record them and see if we could get any proof of the demon. My friend went to open the closet, and that's when I got spooked by a loud audible crash in the closet and ran away. My friend thought it was hilarious, and after more convincing, dragged me back inside the house to record him. My buddy and I got outside of the trailer to rewatch our footage, and what we caught scared me beyond belief.
Dude, I just heard shit in the closet. Yo, bro. Oh, fuck! Hey. What the fuck? Oh, shit! Oh, fuck me, fuck. Fuck! Look at this fucking video! Chase, look at this!
Dude, I saw it.
Fuck me, fuck! Get the hell out of there, dude!
The closet opening and closing, loud knocking and windows being tapped on. All the while I captured orbs outside of the room. While I was outside waiting for my friend to come back out, I heard the trash cans rattle and immediately called my friends out. We didn't see them move, but a little later on we had things thrown at us from an unknown place. I had a live bullet tossed into my leg, and one more land inches away from my buddy's leg.
I have it on video. You were making that shit. Wait, if you're there, then who's throwing shit?
Huh? I just came back from smoking with Roy.
Yeah.
They just passed by, I took a hit, and they kept walking.
We have actual fucking proof of that ghost.
Eventually, we went to get out after I practically dragged my friend into the car, only to have our car alarm go off as we opened the car door. When we got home, my buddy showered and said his back hurt, and when I checked, I saw he had multiple scratches up and down his back, as you can see in this image. It was a normal evening. My best friend and I decided to go for a walk. It was around 10 o'clock in the evening, so it was as dark out as it was gonna get. I live in a small village, so we usually just walk around the streets. There weren't many people out at this hour. We were kind of just walking and talking. A little while into our walk, we started to head home. We went up some hill, which led to the little town area and the only store we had in our village. But as soon as we came up the hill, we saw a weird-looking figure in the distance. It looked like an abnormally tall woman covered in a sheet of some sort, and it had its neck tied with a string or a rope. This is the video we took of the figure. Honestly, it reminded us of the movie The Nun. It was really hard to see since it was totally dark and the streetlights weren't exactly the brightest. It was moving very slowly, and it was waddling left and right like it was drunk or injured or something. We couldn't figure out if it was walking our way or not because it was moving so slowly. It was a really disturbing sight at that moment at that hour of the night. After half a minute of standing there, we realized it was walking towards us. We ran as fast as we could when we realized it didn't even have a visible face or just anything to take note of specifically. We walked around to go home, hoping we wouldn't see her again, but we thought we would, because if we calculated it right, we would meet again on one intersecting street, but luckily we didn't. The next day I told my friend about what happened, and she told me she also saw her, or it, while she was driving with her sister past the bar, which is on the street we thought we would see her again. She moved slower than us, and I really don't know how we missed her, but luckily we did. My friend described the figure just as horrifically as it appeared from the distance to us that night, and since that night, we never saw her again. This just happened a couple days ago. This isn't something that happened to me, but rather something that happened to a family friend. Our family friend, who I'll call Buddy for the sake of this video, believes that something has attached itself to him, something paranormal. It started when he moved into a new house. Almost right away, Buddy and his family started experiencing paranormal activity, such as shadows and voices. One night, Buddy had found a weird discovery in the basement of his new home. Upon doing some moving in the basement, he found something that he had not seen prior to the move-in. He found a stolen cemetery wreath. This made partial sense because the town cemetery was in walking distance of the house. Buddy was aggravated with the activity going on in his new home, so out of anger, he snapped the cemetery wreath, and in his own words, "When I snapped the wreath, every dog in that town started howling. There must have been 20 dogs all howling at the same time. I was scared to death." After that, the activity worsened, and they had no choice but to move. But it seemed the activity followed them to every house they went to. Recently, they've had some of the worst experiences in this apartment they currently live in. Buddy and his wife, who I'll call Pam, have been repeatedly followed by some kind of entity. They decided to set up a phone recording for the night and try to capture anything that might seem paranormal as evidence that they weren't crazy. What Buddy found on the phone was horrifying. He woke up at 3 to review some footage and found a 5-second video that had been taken after the previous recording had stopped. Keep in mind, they have no pets, no children that live with them, no TV or radio was on at the time, and both Buddy and Pam were in bed when this happened. You can clearly see something pick up the phone and a female voice speak into it. I can assure you that is not Pam's voice or any other voice that they're familiar with. Everyone thinks it says, "Did you tell Daddy to rape me?" But you guys take a listen for yourself and come to your own conclusion.
You tell Daddy you raped me?
While Almost a night after this recording, one of Buddy and Pam's daughters died from an overdose. She was 30 years old and 7 months pregnant and a mother of 4, getting ready to be 5. Could this video have something to do with it? We don't know. But if it is a coincidence, then it sure is one hell of a scary one.